Hello everyone, welcome to Midnight Story Channel. I'm here to help you today. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to relax. Your story's about to begin. The rain came down in relentless sheets, a gray curtain that blurred the world beyond my windshield as I navigated the twisting back roads of rural Virginia. My headlights flickered weakly, barely piercing the deluge, and the wipers screamed in protest with every frantic swipe. I was late, horribly late, for my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner, and the decision to take this unmarked shortcut through the hills now felt like a cruel joke. The storm had turned the night into a living beast, its winds howling like a chorus of restless spirits, rattling my old sedan as though it were a toy. I cursed under my breath, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, when the engine let out a sickly wheeze, followed by a grinding shudder that sent my heart plummeting. No, not now, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain's relentless drumbeat. The car lurched forward once, twice, then surrendered entirely, rolling to a stop on the muddy shoulder. For a moment I sat frozen, the world reduced to the rhythmic assault of water on metal and the frantic thud of my pulse. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no hope of rescue. I fumbled for my phone, its screen glowing mockingly with 0 bars. With a shaky breath, I popped the hood and stepped into the storm, the cold rain soaking me to the bone in seconds, plastering my hair across my face like a shroud. Under the hood, my phone's flashlight revealed a tangle of wires and parts I couldn't begin to understand. I was no mechanic, and the futility of my inspection only deepened my despair. That's when I saw it, a pair of headlights slicing through the darkness, growing brighter as they approached. Relief surged through me, tinged with caution. I waved my arms, a soggy silhouette in the storm, praying the driver would stop. To my gratitude, a battered pickup truck slowed and pulled over, its engine growling like a wary animal. A man emerged, his raincoat pulled tight against the gale, his silhouette broad and unyielding. He raised a hand in a casual wave, his voice carrying over the wind's howl. "Car trouble, huh?" "Yeah," I called back, forcing my voice to steady despite the tremor in my chest. "It just gave out. I don't know what's wrong." My words felt fragile, swallowed by the storm's fury. He stepped closer, his boots squelching in the mud, and nodded toward the open hood. "Mind if I take a peek?" His tone was warm, almost neighborly, but there was something in his posture, too stiff, too deliberate, that set my nerves on edge. I stepped aside, clutching my phone like a lifeline. "Go right ahead." As he leaned over the engine, the dim light from my flashlight caught his face. He was older than I'd first thought, perhaps in his late 50s. With a weathered complexion and gray hair slicked back by the rain. His eyes, deep set and shadowed, seemed to flicker with something I couldn't place. Curiosity, maybe, or something darker. I shook off the unease, blaming the storm and my own frayed nerves. After a moment, he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Looks like your alternator's fried. No fixing that out here, I'm afraid." My stomach sank. "Fantastic," I muttered, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Just what I needed." He flashed a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I can give you a lift to the nearest town. There's a garage there. Good folks, they'll sort you out." His offer hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to stay with my car, to wait out the storm alone. But the rain was merciless, my phone useless, and the prospect of spending the night stranded was unbearable. What choice did I have? That'd be Really kind, I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. Thank you. His grin widened, and for a fleeting moment, I swore I saw something predatory in it, a glint that made my skin prickle. Happy to help. Name's Caleb, by the way. Grab what you need and let's get moving. I'm Ellie, I replied. My voice clipped as I hurried to the back seat of my car. I snatched my purse and a small duffel bag, my movements jerky with unease. As I climbed into Caleb's truck, the warmth of the cab was a stark contrast to the icy chill outside, but it did little to soothe the knot in my chest. The interior smelled of damp leather and stale cigarette smoke, and the dashboard was cluttered with crumpled receipts and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. I cast a final glance at my car, its silhouette fading into the rain like a ghost, and Caleb pulled onto the road with a lurch. So, Ellie, he said after a few minutes, his voice cutting through the rhythmic swish of the wipers. What brings a city girl like you out to these parts on a night like this? I shifted in my seat, my damp clothes clinging uncomfortably. I was headed to my cousin's wedding rehearsal. Thought I'd save time with a shortcut. I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. Big mistake, he chuckled. A low, gravelly sound that seemed to vibrate in the cab. Shortcuts will do that to you. Never know what you'll run into out here. His words were casual, but there was an edge to them, a weight that made me grip my purse tighter. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the storm's relentless assault. I stole glances at Caleb, his profile illuminated by the dashboard's faint glow. His hands were clamped on the wheel, knuckles pale, and every so often he'd shoot me a sidelong glance, his lips curling into that unsettling smile. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the headlights revealing little more than rain and shadows. I tried to focus on the scenery, searching for landmarks, but the storm had swallowed everything familiar. Tell me about yourself, Ellie, Caleb said abruptly, his voice slicing through the quiet. What's your story? The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated, my instincts urging caution. I'm a graphic designer, I said, keeping it vague. Work from home mostly, nothing too exciting. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the road, but I could feel his attention on me, probing, searching. A designer, huh? That's something. You got a husband? Kids? The personal turn of the conversation sent a chill through me. No, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. Just me. I shifted, desperate to redirect. What about you? You live around here. Born and bred, he said, a note of pride in his voice. Know these hills better than anyone. Every road, every trail. He glanced at me again, and this time, his smile was sharper, almost mocking. You're a long way from home, Ellie. My heart rate spiked, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. The town shouldn't be this far, I thought, my mind racing. I'd passed through it hours ago, hadn't I? The rain made it hard to gauge distance, but something felt wrong. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, searching for any sign of civilization. A gas station, a road sign, anything. But there was nothing, just the endless ribbon of road and the suffocating darkness beyond. You know, Caleb continued, his tone shifting to something darker, more deliberate. It ain't safe for a woman to be out here alone. Not on a night like this. All kinds of folks roaming these roads. Not all of them friendly. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I'm usually careful, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. Oh, I bet you are. But sometimes careful ain't enough, is it? His words hung in the air, heavy with menace, and I felt the walls of the cab closing in. My fingers brushed the door handle, a small comfort to know it wasn't locked. If it came to it, I could jump, though the thought of tumbling into the storm at this speed was almost as terrifying as staying. I needed to keep him talking, to buy time. You said there's a garage in town? I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. They're good, you said. Caleb nodded, his smile returning. But it was colder now, more calculated. Best in the county, old man Tucker runs it. Known him forever. He'll take real good care of you. The way he said it, the emphasis on real good, made my stomach twist. The truck veered suddenly, turning onto a narrow, unpaved road that seemed to materialize from the darkness. Trees loomed on either side, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. My breath caught. This doesn't look like the way to town, I said, unable to mask the fear in my voice. Caleb chuckled, a sound that sent ice down my spine. Just a little detour. Main roads washed out up ahead. Don't you worry. His reassurance was hollow, and I knew in that moment he was lying. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might burst. I clutched my purse, my fingers brushing the sharp edges of my keys. They weren't much, but they were something. A makeshift weapon if it came to that. You know, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing drawl. I've been driving these roads my whole life. Picked up all sorts of folks, hitchhikers, drifters, but none quite like you, Ellie. You're special. I didn't respond, my mind racing for an escape. Could I jump now? The truck wasn't moving fast, but the rain-slicked ground and dense woods offered little hope. I had no idea where we were, no map to guide me back to safety. Caleb's voice grew softer, almost intimate. Bet you're wondering where we're headed, aren't you? Well, don't fret. We're almost there. As if summoned by his words, a ramshackle house emerged from the gloom, its sagging roof and boarded windows illuminated by the truck's headlights. Caleb pulled up in front, cutting the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rain's steady patter. Here we are, he said, turning to face me, his eyes gleaming with something feral. Home, sweet home. I stared at the house, my blood turning to ice. The peeling paint and broken shutters screamed neglect, and the darkness beyond the windows felt alive, watching. I think there's been a mistake, I said, my voice trembling. I need to get to town, please. Caleb's smile widened, revealing stained teeth that glinted in the dim light. No mistake, Ellie. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. His words were a death knell, and I knew then that this was no simple detour. My hand tightened around my keys, the metal biting into my palm. Please, I said, my voice breaking. Let me go. I won't say anything. I swear he laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that made me flinch. Now, why would I do that? We're just getting started. As he reached for me, his fingers grazing my arm, instinct took over. I swung my fist, the keys protruding like claws, and they raked across his cheek, drawing a spray of blood. He roared in pain, his hands flying to his face, and I seized the moment. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers slipping on the wet metal, and threw it open. I tumbled out, hitting the muddy ground hard, the impact jarring my bones. Scrambling to my feet, I heard Caleb's curses behind me, the truck door slamming as he gave chase. I plunged into the woods, branches tearing at my skin, roots threatening to trip me with every step. His shouts echoed through the trees, closer than I wanted to admit, but adrenaline drove me forward, my lungs burning with every ragged breath. I ran blindly, the storm swallowing the world around me, until the trees began to thin and the ground leveled out. Through the haze of rain, I saw lights, dim, flickering, but real. A town, or at least a road. I pushed harder, my legs screaming in protest, until I burst onto a paved highway. A car approached, its headlights cutting through the dawn's first light, and I waved frantically, praying it wasn't Caleb. To my relief, an elderly couple pulled over, their faces creased with concern. Good heavens, child, what happened? the woman asked as I collapsed into their back seat, my body racked with sobs. I I need the police, I managed, tears streaming down my face. Please. As they drove me to the nearest station, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. I was safe for now, but the memory of Caleb's eyes, his predatory grin, burned into my mind. I vowed never to take another shortcut, never to trust a stranger's smile. The road stretched behind me, a ribbon of asphalt fading into the storm's aftermath. But I knew the real darkness wasn't in the rain or the woods. It was in the choices we make and the shadows that wait for us when we stray too far from the light. The key card beeped softly, and I pushed open the door to room 312, my body aching for the promise of a soft bed after a day that had wrung me dry. A marathon of client meetings in this nowhere town had left my mind foggy. My tie loosened like a noose finally cut free. All I wanted was to kick off my shoes, order a greasy burger from room service, and let the hum of late-night TV drown out the world. But as I stepped into the room, the stale air and flickering fluorescent light hinted at something off, a subtle wrongness that prickled the back of my neck. Little did I know, this nondescript motel room was a gateway to a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I tossed my briefcase onto a threadbare armchair, its faded upholstery reeking of cigarette smoke and regret. The room was a time capsule of cheap hospitality, peeling wallpaper in a garish paisley pattern, a bed that sagged under its own weight, and a boxy television bolted to the dresser like a relic from another era. It was only one night, I reminded myself. Loosening my tie further as I surveyed the space with a weary sigh, tomorrow I'd be back in the city, far from this crumbling outpost and its endless parade of fluorescent-lit conference rooms. But as I moved to unpack my overnight bag, my foot caught on a snag in the carpet, sending me stumbling into the bed frame with a muffled curse. Frowning, I knelt to inspect the floor, expecting a loose thread or a stain from some long-forgotten spill. Instead, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a small, tarnished ring embedded in the carpet. Curiosity sparked through my exhaustion, and I gave it a tentative tug. To my astonishment, a section of the carpet lifted, revealing a wooden trapdoor beneath, its edges worn but sturdy. My pulse quickened as I stared at the unexpected discovery, 1,000 questions tumbling through my mind. What was this doing in a motel room? Where did it lead? And why hadn't it been sealed shut? Common sense urged me to call the front desk, report the find, and demand a new room. But something held me back, a flicker of reckless intrigue, or perhaps the bone-deep fatigue that made rational decisions feel like too much effort. Against my better judgment, I grasped the trapdoor's rusted handle and pulled. It opened with a low groan, revealing a narrow ladder descending into a void of inky blackness. A damp, earthy scent wafted up, tinged with the musty tang of decay, and I wrinkled my nose in distaste. Switching on my phone's flashlight, I peered down, the beam illuminating a cramped tunnel below, its walls rough-hewn dirt braced by splintered wooden beams. My heart thudded in my chest, a mix of fear and fascination urging me forward. This was no maintenance hatch. It was too hidden, too deliberate. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the front desk number, but the pull of the unknown was stronger. Tucking my phone into my pocket, I lowered myself onto the ladder, each rung creaking ominously under my weight. The air grew colder as I descended, the motel's warmth replaced by a clammy chill that seeped into my bones. My flashlight cast eerie shadows, the beams dancing like specters along the tunnel's walls, and I had to stoop to avoid brushing the low ceiling. At the bottom, I swept the light around, taking in the claustrophobic space. The tunnel stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness, its walls lined with rusted pipes and frayed electrical wiring that looked decades old. It resembled a service corridor, but the secrecy of its entrance suggested something far less mundane. Why would a guest room have access to such a place? Curiosity overpowered caution, and I chose a direction toward what I hoped was the heart of the motel, and began to walk, my footsteps muffled by the packed earth beneath my feet. The deeper I ventured, the heavier the air became, thick with moisture and the faint, acrid smell of something I couldn't identify. Water dripped in the distance, each plink echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. I was about to turn back, my nerves fraying at the edges, when a sound stopped me cold. Voices low and urgent, filtering through the darkness. They were human, unmistakably so, but their tone carried a sharpness that set my teeth on edge. My first instinct was to call out, to announce my presence, but a primal warning held my tongue. These weren't maintenance workers chatting about their day. These were voices laced with tension, secrecy, danger. I crept forward, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they'd hear it. The voices grew clearer, emanating from a junction where the tunnel widened slightly. Pressing myself against the damp wall, I strained to listen, catching fragments of a conversation that chilled me to the core. The shipment's due tomorrow night. We need to be ready. What about the cops? That detective's been poking around. Don't worry about him. He's been dealt with. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual exchange. It was a plot, something illegal, something deadly. I edged closer, desperate to hear more, my flashlight dimmed to avoid detection. The boss wants this clean, one voice continued, low and authoritative. No slip-ups this time. Midnight, usual spot. I leaned in, my breath shallow, trying to glimpse the speakers through the shadows. That's when my foot slipped on a slick patch of mud, and I stumbled, my hand shooting out to brace against the wall. My phone clattered to the ground, the flashlight beam spinning wildly, and the voices cut off like a guillotine. What was that? One of them hissed. Someone's here. Check it out. Panic surged through me, a white-hot wave that drowned out reason. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I snatched it up, the beam revealing nothing but dirt and darkness. Footsteps echoed closer, heavy and purposeful, accompanied by the bobbing glow of a flashlight. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth. My only thought to escape the tunnel and the men who now hunted me. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of my fear. As I retraced my steps, the latter my only hope. In my haste, I took a wrong turn, the tunnel branching into a maze of identical passages. The footsteps were relentless, their shouts growing louder, more menacing. He's down here! Find him! My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. A root snagged my foot and I went down hard, pain exploding in my knee as I hit the dirt. The sound of my fall echoed, a beacon for my pursuers, and I scrambled to my feet just as a beam of light swept over me. Stop right there, a voice barked, but I didn't look back. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning until I was hopelessly lost. Just when I thought my strength would fail, I spotted a ladder ahead, identical to the one in my room. With a surge of desperation, I lunged for it, climbing with reckless speed, my hands slipping on the rungs. I burst through the trapdoor, finding myself in another motel room, dark, empty, and mercifully silent. I slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged a heavy dresser over it, my chest heaving as I collapsed against the wall, struggling to process the nightmare I'd just escaped. Peering out the window, I realized I was on the ground floor, far from my second-floor room near the lobby. The parking lot was quiet, the storm outside a distant rumble, but I knew I wasn't safe. Those men were involved in something big. Drugs, trafficking, maybe worse, and they knew someone had overheard them. I needed to get to my room, grab my things, and get out before they figured out who I was. Cautiously, I slipped into the hallway, my heart in my throat as I made my way to the main building. Every shadow a potential threat. The stairs to the second floor felt like a gauntlet, each step a test of my nerve. What if they were waiting for me? What if they'd already found my room? I swiped my key card and pushed open the door to room 312, half expecting to find a gang of thugs inside. But the room was untouched, exactly as I'd left it. The trap door still yawning open in the floor like a hungry mouth. I let out a shaky breath, then moved quickly, stuffing clothes and papers into my bag with frantic urgency. I had to leave, to put this place behind me before it swallowed me whole. As I packed, my mind raced. Should I call the police? Tell them I'd stumbled onto a criminal conspiracy while trespassing in a secret tunnel? The story sounded insane, even to me. No, the safest thing was to vanish, to disappear before they could track me down. I closed the trap door and dragged the armchair over it, a flimsy barrier against whatever lurked below. With my bag slung over my shoulder, I stepped into the hallway, forcing myself to walk calmly despite the scream of panic in my veins. The lobby was a blur of fluorescent light and cheap carpet, the night clerk barely glancing up from his phone as I passed. But as I reached the exit, I heard voices, sharp, urgent, and all too familiar. One of them was from the tunnel, unmistakable even through the haze of fear. I froze, my hand on the door, as the voices grew louder, accompanied by the thud of footsteps. They'd found me. Without thinking, I bolted through the side exit, the cool night air hitting me like a slap as I sprinted across the parking lot to my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, the shouts behind me growing closer. The engine roared to life just as two figures burst from the motel, their silhouettes menacing in the sodium glow of the streetlights. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I peeled out of the lot, the men's faces blurring in my rearview mirror. They ran toward a parked SUV, clearly intent on pursuit, and I floored the gas, weaving through the empty streets with no plan, only the desperate need to escape. I drove for hours, taking random turns, doubling back, my eyes glued to the mirror for any sign of a tail. The adrenaline faded, leaving me hollow and trembling, the reality of what I'd uncovered sinking in. Those men weren't just criminals, they were organized, connected, and now they knew someone had seen too much. By dawn, I pulled into a rest stop, my hands still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The motel a distant speck in my memory, but an unshakable weight on my soul. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, I realized I'd never look at a motel the same way again. Room 312 had been a trap, a doorway to secrets better left buried. I didn't know if those men would find me, if they'd hunt me down for what I'd heard. But one thing was certain, the world was full of hidden passages, and sometimes curiosity could lead you straight into the dark. The first raindrop struck my cheek like a cold, whispered warning, pulling my gaze to the slate-gray sky that had begun to churn with menace. I cursed my recklessness, my boots sinking into the muddy trail as the forest around me seemed to tighten its grip. What had begun as a solitary hike through the Blue Ridge Mountains, a chance to escape the noise of city life and find some clarity in the wild, was now unraveling into a nightmare I could never have anticipated. The trail, once a clear ribbon of packed earth, had vanished hours ago, leaving me to wander through a labyrinth of towering pines and tangled underbrush. As the storm gathered strength, the air grew sharp with the promise of thunder, and I realized with a sinking heart that I was utterly, hopelessly lost. The rain escalated from a tentative drizzle to a torrential assault, soaking through my lightweight jacket and chilling me to the bone. My pack, heavy with gear, felt like a stone dragging me down as I pushed forward, my boots squelching in the mire. The forest, so serene in the morning's golden light, now loomed with an oppressive weight, its shadows lengthening as the day bled into dusk. Thunder rumbled closer, a low growl that vibrated through the earth, urging me to quicken my pace. I needed shelter, and fast. Being caught in a full-blown storm was a death sentence out here, with no map, no signal, and no one to hear my cries. That's when I saw it, emerging from the deluge like a specter, a cabin, small and weathered, its log walls silvered by time and neglect. It stood alone in a clearing, its sagging roof and cracked windows silhouetted against a flash of lightning. Relief flooded through me, a warm tide against the cold dread that had taken root. It wasn't much, but it was a haven, a bulwark against the storm's wrath. I jogged toward it, my pack bouncing painfully against my spine, and climbed the creaking steps to the porch, the boards groaning under my weight. The door hung slightly ajar, its hinges rusted and silent as I pushed it open with a cautious hand. "Hello?" I called into the dim interior, my voice swallowed by the storm's roar. No answer came, only the faint patter of rain leaking through the roof. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, revealing a space both sparse and strangely intimate. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and dark, flanked by a sagging couch and a rickety table. A narrow staircase spiraled up to a loft, its steps worn smooth by years of unseen feet. Dust coated every surface, a testament to the cabin's abandonment, yet there was an odd sense of order, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. I shrugged off my dripping jacket, hanging it on a peg by the door, and set about exploring my temporary refuge. The storm outside was a living thing, its winds shrieking through the trees, rattling the cabin's bones. After rummaging through a corner, I found a stack of firewood, brittle but dry, and knelt by the fireplace, my damp matches sparking fitfully. It took several tries, but soon a small blaze crackled to life, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the chill that clung to my skin. I sat cross-legged before it, my clothes steaming, and tried to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The cabin was a godsend, but something about it felt wrong, too still, too watchful. As the flames cast flickering shadows across the walls, I couldn't ignore the nagging sense that I wasn't alone. The cabin's silence was too perfect, its emptiness too deliberate. I chalked it up to nerves, to the isolation of the woods and the storm's relentless assault. But the feeling grew, a pressure behind my eyes that refused to fade. To distract myself, I explored further, my flashlight sweeping over the sparse furnishings. In a drawer beneath the table, I found a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, the ink faded to a ghostly scrawl. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, squinting to decipher the fragmented entries. Day 4. The sounds are louder now, closer. It's out there, circling. Day 9. I saw it today. God help me. Those eyes, they aren't human. Day 15. No sleep. It watches always, waiting. The final entry, scrawled in a trembling hand, sent ice through my veins. If you're reading this, leave. Leave now, before it claims you. I snapped the journal shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was just the ravings of a madman, I told myself. Some hermit driven to paranoia by solitude. But the words burrowed into my mind, their warning amplified by the storm's fury. A deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, plunging it into darkness as the fire guttered out. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam weak against the suffocating black, and moved to relight the fire. That's when I heard it, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. A low, guttural growl, unmistakable and close, coming from just beyond the porch. I held my breath, straining to listen over the storm's din. There it was again, nearer now, followed by the heavy crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. My mind raced. Bear? Mountain lion? But the growl was wrong, too deep, too deliberate. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the room for a weapon. The footsteps stopped, and I heard something else. A wet, snuffling sound, like a predator scenting its prey beneath the door's crack. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the door handle began to turn, slow and purposeful. I grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, its weight cold and reassuring in my hands, and positioned myself beside the door. If something came through, I'd have one chance to strike. But the handle stopped moving, and the footsteps retreated, fading into the storm. Relief washed over me, fleeting and fragile, only to shatter as a new sound reached my ears. Claws scraping against the cabin's exterior, climbing toward the roof. I spun toward the window, my flashlight beam trembling as it swept the glass. A shadow passed, blotting out the faint moonlight, and then I saw it, a face pressed against the pane, its features twisted into a grotesque parody of humanity. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, hollow and unblinking, and its mouth stretched into a grin that was all teeth and malice. Our gazes locked, and a primal terror seized me, raw and all-consuming. The thing vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but I could still hear it moving, circling the cabin with predatory patience. I was trapped, a flimsy wooden structure, my only defense against whatever hunted me. I sank into a corner, clutching the poker, my body shaking as the night dragged on. The creature, for what else could it be, seemed content to toy with me, its claws scratching intermittently at the walls, its growls a constant reminder of its presence. Hours bled into eternity, each sound a fresh assault on my fraying nerves. I jumped at every creak, every gust of wind, convinced the thing was moments from breaking through. But as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, the noises ceased, leaving only an eerie silence. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, until the forest outside stirred with the soft chatter of morning birds. Slowly I approached the door, my hand trembling as I gripped the knob. I yanked it open, bracing for an attack, but the porch was empty, the clearing beyond bathed in a fragile, golden light. The wooden railing bore deep claw marks, jagged and fresh, a silent testament to the night's horror. I didn't linger to investigate. I grabbed my still-damp jacket and fled, my legs carrying me down the trail with a speed born of desperation. I had no idea if I was heading the right way, only that I needed to escape that cabin and whatever haunted it. By mid-afternoon, I stumbled onto a paved road, my body battered and my mind reeling. A passing motorist, a grizzled farmer in a pickup truck, took pity on me, his eyes widening at my disheveled state as he drove me to the nearest town. At the sheriff's station, I poured out my story, my voice hoarse and unsteady. The deputy listened with a practiced patience, but I saw the skepticism in his eyes, the faint curl of his lip as he promised to send a team to investigate. I knew he didn't believe me, that he thought I'd been spooked by shadows in a storm. Later, at a roadside diner, nursing a cup of bitter coffee while waiting for a friend to pick me up, I couldn't shake the memory of those yellow eyes, that inhuman grin. I glanced out the window, the forest looming in the distance like a dark promise. For a moment I swore I saw a shadow shift among the trees, a glint of yellow in the twilight. But when I blinked, it was gone. The journal tucked into my pack felt like a lead weight, its warning echoing in my mind. Leave now before it claims you. I had escaped, but the cabin's shadow clung to me, a cold certainty that the thing in the woods wasn't finished. As my friend's car pulled up, I cast one last glance at the forest, its edges blurring in the fading light. I vowed never to return, to leave those mountains and their secrets behind. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever had hunted me that night had marked me, its hunger a quiet pulse in the dark. The forest receded in the rearview mirror, but the cabin's keeper was still out there, waiting, and something told me our paths would cross again. The weight of the day clung to me like damp cloth as I turned the key in the lock of my front door, my shoulders sagging under the exhaustion of a shift that had tested every ounce of my patience. Work had been a relentless gauntlet, missed deadlines, irate clients, and a coffee spill that had ruined my favorite blouse. All I craved was the sanctuary of my home, a steaming shower, a glass of Merlot, and the mindless comfort of a sitcom rerun. But as I stepped across the threshold of my cozy bungalow in suburban Portland, kicking off my flats with a sigh, a faint but unmistakable wrongness prickled my senses. The air carried an unfamiliar scent, something sharp, like aftershave, and a leather jacket I didn't recognize was slung carelessly over the arm of my couch. My heart gave a lurch, a sudden jolt of adrenaline cutting through the fog of fatigue. Was that the clatter of dishes from the kitchen? My kitchen, where no one should be? I froze, my purse still clutched in one hand, my mind racing through possibilities. A break-in? A prank? My pulse quickened as I edged forward, the hardwood floor creaking beneath my cautious steps. Before I could decide whether to call 911 or grab the baseball bat from the hall closet, a man emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel draped over his shoulder, his expression as casual as if we'd shared this space for years. "Hey there," he said, his voice warm but tinged with a practiced ease that set my nerves on edge. He was in his early 30s, with neatly combed hair and a disarming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be the old tenant. Forget something?" I stood rooted to the spot, my mouth dry, my brain struggling to process the surreal scene. Old tenant? This was my house, my haven, bought with 3 years of savings and sweat. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice wavering despite my effort to sound firm. "Who are you? And what are you doing in my house?" His smile faltered for a split second, a crack in his facade before he recovered. "Your house? Oh, I think there's been a mix-up. I just moved in this morning. The landlord handed me the keys himself." He gestured vaguely toward the coffee table, where a manila folder lay open, papers spilling out like an accusation. I shook my head, indignation rising to drown out the fear. "That's impossible. I own this place. I've lived here for 3 years. There is no landlord." My words were sharp, but they felt fragile, as if the very foundation of my reality was crumbling beneath me. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression shifting to one of exaggerated concern. "Look, I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. I've got a signed lease right here. Paid the deposit and everything." He crossed to the table and plucked a document from the folder, holding it out like a shield. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the paper. It looked real, too real, complete with my address, a signature I didn't recognize, and the name Daniel Harper listed as the tenant. My stomach twisted, a cold knot of dread tightening. "This isn't right," I said, my voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I never rented this place out. This is my home." I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I prepared to dial the police. "I'm calling 911. This is insane." "Whoa, hold on," Daniel said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Let's not escalate this. Why don't we call the landlord and sort it out? I've got his number right here." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts with a calm that only deepened my unease. Something in his tone, His too smooth demeanor screamed deception. I hesitated, torn between instinct and the fear of looking foolish. Fine, I said, my voice clipped. Call him. But I'm telling you, there's no landlord. I own this house outright. Daniel nodded, his smile returning, and tapped the screen, putting the call on speaker. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered, one that sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, this is Peterson. I knew that voice. It belonged to my neighbor, Carl Peterson, a sleazy real estate speculator who'd been hounding me to sell my property for months, his offers laced with thinly veiled threats. Mr. Peterson, it's Daniel Harper, the new tenant at 421 Maple Drive, Daniel said, his eyes locked on mine. We've got a situation. The previous owner's here claiming she didn't rent the place out. My jaw dropped, rage surging through me. Carl's voice crackled through the speaker, stumbling over his words. Just a misunderstanding, I'm sure. Don't worry, Daniel. She probably forgot she leased it. You've got a legal contract. You're good. I snatched the phone from Daniel's hand, my voice shaking with fury. Carl, what the hell are you playing at? You know damn well this is my house. I never signed anything. There was a long pause, then a click as the call ended, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. I stared at the phone, then at Daniel, who looked genuinely confused, though I couldn't tell if it was an act. Okay, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I can prove this is my house. I have the deed, tax records, everything. I crossed to the bookshelf where I kept my important documents, my mind reeling. This had to be a scam, some elaborate fraud orchestrated by Carl. But how had he gotten keys to my home? As I reached for the folder, I noticed something else. Several of my books were missing, replaced by unfamiliar titles with cracked spines. I yanked open a drawer in the side table. My spare keys were gone. A chill ran through me, sharp and invasive, as I realized someone had been here, methodically altering my space, erasing me from my own life. I turned to Daniel, who watched me with a mix of wariness and curiosity. We need to call the police, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. Right now. He nodded slowly, his brow furrowing. Okay, but I swear I had no idea about any of this. I thought I was renting this place fair and square. His words sounded sincere, but I didn't trust them. Not yet. Not with my world turned upside down. I dialed 911, my voice steady as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, who promised to send a unit immediately. While we waited, I paced the living room, pointing out the details that proved this was my home. The scuff mark on the baseboard from moving in, the paint I'd chosen for the walls, the photos on the mantle that were unmistakably mine. Daniel listened, his expression unreadable, and I wondered if he was a victim or a pawn in Carl's scheme. The sound of an engine outside made us both turn toward the window, but it wasn't a police cruiser. It was Carl's rusted pickup, its headlights cutting through the dusk. My blood boiled, and I stormed to the door, yanking it open just as he raised his fist to knock. He stumbled back, his face a mask of surprise and guilt, his eyes darting between me and Daniel, who had followed me to the doorway. Carl, you bastard, I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. How dare you? How did you get keys to my house? And what's with this fake lease? He licked his lips, his nervous smile faltering. Now, let's not get worked up, Lauren. I'm sure we can figure this out. Figure what out? I cut him off, stepping closer, my hands clenched into fists. That you've been sneaking into my home, replacing my things, that you forged documents to steal my property? This is breaking and entering, fraud, and who knows what else? Carl's expression darkened, his pretense of civility crumbling. You should have sold when I offered, he growled, his voice low and venomous. I told you I'd get this place one way or another. I was speechless, the sheer audacity of his confession stealing my breath. Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. So the lease is fake? This was all some scheme to force her out? Carl shrugged, a smirk twisting his lips. Would have worked too, if she hadn't come home early. A few more days, and her stuff would have been gone, replaced with yours. She'd have looked like a lunatic trying to claim this was her house. The violation hit me like a physical blow, a wave of anger and betrayal that brought tears to my eyes. Before I could respond, the wail of a siren pierced the night, and Carl's smirk vanished, his face paling as a police cruiser pulled up. You called the cops? He sputtered, his bravado collapsing. Of course I did, I shouted, my voice raw. What did you expect? The next hours were a blur of flashing lights, police statements, and the curious stares of neighbors drawn by the commotion. The officers took Carl into custody, his shoulders slumped in defeat as they led him away in handcuffs. Daniel, shaken and apologetic, handed over the keys and lease without protest, explaining how he'd answered an online ad and met Carl that morning, unaware of the deception. He seemed as much a victim as I was, caught in a web he hadn't woven. As the police cleared out and the street fell quiet, I stood on my porch, staring at the house that had been my refuge. It felt different now, tainted by Carl's intrusion, the subtle signs of his violation etched into every corner, the unfamiliar books, the missing keys, the faint scent of his presence. Daniel approached, his expression sheepish. I'm so sorry, Lauren, I had no idea. My old lease hasn't expired yet. If you need a place to stay, somewhere to feel safe, you're welcome there. I nodded, too drained to hold a grudge. Thank you. I might take you up on that. His offer was a small kindness, a lifeline in a world that suddenly felt unmoored. Back inside, I poured the glass of wine I'd been dreaming of, though the taste was bitter against the weight of the night. My home was still mine, legally and undeniably, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. I walked through the rooms, cataloging the changes, Daniel's jacket, the rearranged shelves, the echoes of Carl's betrayal. As I sipped my wine, I made a silent vow. I would reclaim this space, rebuild the sense of safety that had been stolen. It wouldn't be easy, but I was stronger than Carl had ever imagined. Home was more than walls and a roof. It was a feeling, a fortress of belonging. And I'd be damned if I let anyone take that from me again. The old warehouse loomed like a forgotten titan against the ink-black sky, its rusted steel skeleton casting jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I pulled my jacket tighter against the late autumn chill, my breath fogging in the crisp air as I approached the entrance, thermos of coffee in hand. My name's Ethan, and for the past 4 years, I've been a night security guard at this sprawling storage facility on the outskirts of Cleveland. It's not a glamorous gig, long hours, endless solitude, and a paycheck that barely covers the rent. But it gives me time to tinker with my screenplay, a gritty crime drama I've been pouring my heart into between patrols. Tonight, though, as I punched in my code and stepped into the cavernous interior, a nagging unease coiled in my gut, whispering that this shift would be anything but routine. The warehouse was a labyrinth of towering shelves and forgotten crates, a monument to obsolete inventory and corporate neglect. During the day, it buzzed with forklifts and shouting workers, but at night it was my domain, a kingdom of silence broken only by the hum of flickering fluorescents and the occasional groan of the building settling. I started my rounds as always, my flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, checking locks and windows with mechanical precision. The air smelled of dust and old cardboard, a familiar tang that usually comforted me in its predictability. But tonight, every sound seemed sharper, every shadow deeper, as if the warehouse itself were holding its breath. It was around 1:30 a.m., halfway through my second patrol, when I heard it, a faint thud, like a heavy box hitting the floor, followed by the murmur of voices. I froze, my hand hovering over the radio clipped to my belt, my pulse quickening. The warehouse was supposed to be empty at this hour, its workers long gone, its gates locked tight. I killed my flashlight, plunging myself into near darkness, and strained to listen. There it was again, definitely voices, low and urgent, drifting from the far end of the complex near the loading docks. My first thought was vandals, maybe kids looking for a thrill, but the tone was wrong. Too focused, too deliberate. This was something else. I hesitated, my thumb brushing the radio's call button. If I alerted the police, and it turned out to be nothing, a stray cat or my own imagination, I'd look like a fool, and my supervisor wasn't exactly forgiving of false alarms. But the voices persisted, their cadence laced with a tension that set my nerves on edge. Swallowing my doubt, I decided to investigate, my boots silent on the concrete as I moved through the maze of aisles, the shadows seeming to shift and sway with every step. The closer I got to the loading docks, the clearer the voices became. 2, maybe 3 men, their words clipped and purposeful. I pressed myself against a stack of pallets, the rough wood biting into my back, and peered around the corner. What I saw sent a chill racing down my spine. 3 men stood in a tight circle near an open van, its rear doors yawning wide to reveal a pile of black duffel bags, each bulging with unseen contents. One of them, a wiry figure with a shaved head, held a handgun, its barrel glinting in the dim glow of a portable lantern. They were unloading the bags, stacking them with practiced efficiency, their movements betraying a grim determination. My breath caught, my mind reeling. This wasn't petty theft. This was something big, something dangerous. I eased back, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they'd hear it. I needed to call for backup, to get out before they spotted me. But as I reached for my radio, my elbow brushed against a loose crate. The sound was small, a dull clunk, but in the warehouse's stillness, it echoed like a gunshot. The voices stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence that pressed against my chest. "What was that?" one of them hissed, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Go check it out," another ordered, and I heard the scuff of boots on concrete moving toward my hiding spot. Panic surged through me, a white-hot wave that drowned out reason. I couldn't go back the way I'd come. They'd see me in seconds. My only option was deeper into the warehouse, into the labyrinth I knew better than they did. I bolted, my flashlight abandoned, relying on memory and moonlight filtering through high windows to guide me. Behind me, shouts erupted, harsh and commanding, followed by the thud of pursuit. I wove through aisles, ducking under shelves and leaping over stray pallets, my lungs burning as I pushed my body to its limits. The warehouse, once a familiar refuge, had become a trap, its endless corridors twisting like a predator's maze. I spotted a cluster of empty crates and dove behind them, my chest heaving as I tried to silence my ragged breathing. The footsteps grew closer, flashlight beams sweeping across the floor, their arcs slicing through the darkness like blades. "He's here somewhere," one of the men growled, his voice thick with menace. "Find him!" I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to vanish, the acrid scent of sweat and fear mingling with the warehouse's dusty air. For a heart-stopping moment, a beam lingered near my hiding spot, and I heard the man's heavy breathing, close enough to smell the cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. But then the light moved on, the footsteps fading into the distance, and I let out a shaky exhale, my body trembling with relief. I couldn't stay here. They'd circle back eventually. I needed to reach the office where a landline could connect me to the police. Slowly, I crept from my hiding place, my eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The warehouse was a maze, but I knew its quirks. The shortcuts through the overflow section, the blind spots near the old machinery. I moved with purpose, my steps light, until a voice shattered the silence. "There he is!" I broke into a sprint, no longer caring about stealth, my only thought to reach the office door glinting in the distance. I was almost there, my fingers brushing the handle, when something hit me from behind. A heavy blow that sent me sprawling to the concrete, pain exploding across my shoulders. Rough hands yanked me to my feet, and I found myself face to face with the wiry man, his eyes cold and unyielding in the dim light. "Well, well," he sneered, his grip like iron on my arm. "Looks like we've got a nosy little rat." I struggled, but it was futile. His strength was relentless, and the glint of his gun was a silent promise of violence. "What do we do with him?" the man holding me asked, his voice low and urgent. Another figure stepped forward, taller, his face half hidden in shadow. "No witnesses," he said flatly, and my blood turned to ice. This was it, the end here in this godforsaken warehouse with no one to know what had happened. I braced for the inevitable, my mind screaming for a way out, when a faint sound pierced the haze of fear, the distant wail of sirens, growing louder with every second. The men froze, their faces twisting with panic. "How the hell?" one started, but I knew the answer. In the scuffle, my radio must have triggered the panic button, a feature I'd always dismissed as overkill. Help was coming, and they knew it. The man holding me cursed, shoving me to the ground with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. "We're out of here," he barked, and they sprinted toward the van, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I lay there gasping, the cold concrete a harsh comfort as the sirens grew deafening. Minutes later, the warehouse swarmed with police, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. I gave my statement, my voice shaking as I recounted the night's events, the officers nodding with a mix of skepticism and admiration. They found the van abandoned a mile away, 2 of the men in custody, the 3rd still at large. The duffel bags confirmed my worst fears. Drugs, weapons cache, a haul that marked this as a major operation. As dawn broke, painting the parking lot in shades of pink and gray, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. A detective approached, his face grim but approving. "You did good, kid," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Stumbled onto a trafficking ring we've been chasing for months. That panic button saved your life." I nodded, numb, the weight of his words sinking in. "They'll come after me, won't they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "These guys, they've got reach." The detective's expression darkened. "We'll do what we can, but you might want to lay low for a while. New job, new city. These types don't forget a face." His words were a cold reality, a reminder that my life as I knew it was over. I'd survived, but at a cost. As I watched the police cordon off the warehouse, its silhouette stark against the rising sun, a strange clarity settled over me. For years, I'd lived in the monotony of night shifts, dreaming of adventure through the pages of my screenplay. Now, I'd lived one, a heart-pounding, life-altering chapter straight out of the stories I wrote. The fear was still there, a quiet pulse in my veins, but so was something new. Purpose. I turned to the detective, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Ever thought about hiring a consultant? Someone who knows what it's like to stumble into the dark and come out alive?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "One step at a time, kid. One step at a time." As the ambulance pulled away, the warehouse faded in the distance, a monolith of secrets and shadows. My nights as a security guard were over, but a new story was beginning. One I'd write with every choice, every risk, every moment I refused to let fear define me. The world was bigger now, its edges sharper, and I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with nothing but a pen and the courage to keep moving forward. The storm descended like a vengeful deity, its wind shrieking through the narrow streets of my quiet Seattle neighborhood, rattling the windows of my century-old craftsman home. I was curled up on the living room sofa, a half-read mystery novel splayed across my lap, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. Rain lashed the glass in relentless waves, each gust a reminder of the world's wildness beyond my cozy sanctuary. The power had been flickering all evening, a teasing dance of light and dark, so when the room plunged into sudden blackness, I wasn't surprised. With a sigh, I set the book aside, my fingers groping for my phone's flashlight to navigate the familiar maze of my home. But as I rose, a sound sharp, deliberate, and utterly out of place froze me in my tracks. A heavy thud from the basement below. My breath caught, my pulse spiking as I stood motionless, straining to hear over the storm's cacophony. The house was old, its bones creaking with every gust. But this was different, a sound with intent, as if something had been dropped or knocked over. I told myself it was nothing, a pipe rattling or a box toppling in the cluttered basement, but the silence that followed felt too heavy, too expectant. Then, unmistakable and chilling, came the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, climbing the basement stairs. My heart lurched into my throat. Someone was in my house. I clutched my phone tighter, its dim glow a frail shield against the darkness, my mind racing through possibilities. A burglar? A neighbor seeking shelter? But the footsteps were too deliberate, too unhurried for someone caught in a storm. I fumbled with my phone, intending to call 911, but in my panic, I realized I'd turned it off earlier to save battery. The startup screen taunted me, its loading bar crawling with agonizing slowness. Another creak echoed, closer now, at the base of the main staircase leading to the second floor. Whoever it was, they were moving upward toward me. I needed to hide. My bedroom was down the hall, a safe haven with a lock, but to reach it, I'd have to cross the open landing at the top of the stairs, risking exposure if the intruder looked up. The footsteps grew louder, each one a hammer blow to my nerves. And I made my decision as the first stair groaned under their weight. I darted across the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and slipped into my bedroom, easing the door shut with trembling hands. My breath came in shallow gasps. My body pressed against the wall as I fought the urge to slam the door and betray my position. The footsteps reached the landing, pausing just outside my door, and I held my breath, certain they could hear the frantic thud of my heart. A floorboard creaked inches away, and I scanned the room for a weapon, my eyes landing on a heavy brass candlestick on the nightstand. It wasn't much, but its weight felt solid, grounding as I unplugged it and gripped it tightly. I positioned myself behind the door, my muscles coiled, ready to strike if they entered. The door handle turned, slow and deliberate, the latch clicking like a gunshot in the silence. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity as the door began to swing open, a shadow spilling across the floor, elongated and distorted by the storm's faint light filtering through the window. I raised the candlestick, my arms trembling with adrenaline as the intruder took a single step into the room. With a cry of defiance, I swung with all my strength, the metal connecting with a sickening thud. The figure stumbled, a grunt of pain escaping them, and I seized the moment, shoving past and bolting for the stairs. I took the steps two at a time, my bare feet slipping on the polished wood, nearly sending me sprawling. Behind me, angry shouts echoed, followed by the thunder of pursuit, spurring me onward despite the burning in my lungs. I reached the foyer, my fingers fumbling with the front door's deadbolt, precious seconds slipping away as I struggled to free myself. Just as I turned the lock, a hand clamped onto my shoulder, yanking me backward with brutal force. I screamed more in fury than fear and drove my elbow back, feeling it connect with something solid. The grip loosened, and I wrenched the door open, bursting into the storm's icy embrace. Rain soaked me instantly, my nightgown clinging to my skin as I sprinted down the driveway, the pavement biting into my soles. I glanced back, my heart pounding, and saw a figure silhouetted in the doorway, their form blurred by the deluge. They hesitated, then started after me, their footsteps pounding against the wet asphalt. I pushed harder, rounding the corner onto the main street, my lungs screaming for air. Surely a neighbor would be home, would see me, would help. I pounded on the first door I reached, my fist bruising against the wood. "Help!" I screamed, my voice nearly lost in the wind's howl. "Please, someone!" But the house remained dark, its windows blind and silent. I moved to the next house, then the next. Desperation clawing at my chest as each door refused to answer. Where was everyone? The sound of running footsteps grew closer, distorted by the storm, making it impossible to judge their distance. At the end of the street, a flicker of hope. A light glowed in the upstairs window of the O'Connor's house. Someone was home. I sprinted toward it, my legs burning, my vision blurred by rain and tears. I was halfway up their driveway when something tackled me from behind, sending me crashing onto the sodden grass. Pain flared through my ribs as I rolled over, staring up at my attacker, their features shrouded in shadow. "No!" I yelled, kicking out wildly, my foot connecting with their shin. They grunted, stumbling back, and I scrambled to my feet, ready to run again. But then the world exploded into light. The O'Connor's porch light blazed on, flooding the yard with stark clarity. "What's going on out here?" a gruff voice called, and I turned to see Mr. O'Connor standing on his porch, a golf club gripped in his hands, his face etched with concern. Relief crashed over me, a tidal wave that left me trembling. "Please," I gasped, my voice raw. "Someone broke into my house. They're trying to..." I stopped, turning back to my attacker, and froze. In the light, I could see him clearly, my neighbor, Mark, his face a mask of confusion and pain, a hand pressed to his temple where I'd struck him. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "What are you talking about? I heard you screaming from down the street and came to check on you." I stared at him, my mind reeling, struggling to reconcile the terror of the past minutes with the man before me. Mark, who'd brought me soup when I had the flu, who'd helped me fix my fence last summer. But the noises, I stammered. Someone was in my house. I heard them. Mark shook his head, his expression softening. "I didn't see anyone. Your front door was wide open, and I could hear you yelling. I was worried." Mr. O'Connor stepped closer, his golf club lowered but still ready. "Everything okay here, Clara? You sure it wasn't just the storm? These old houses make all kinds of racket in weather like this." I opened my mouth to protest, to insist that what I'd heard was real, but doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Had I imagined it? Had the storm and my own fear turned creaks into footsteps, shadows into threats? "Maybe," I said, my voice small, uncertain. "I don't know anymore." Mark placed a gentle hand on my arm, his touch grounding despite my lingering fear. "Come on, let's get you home. You're soaked through." His voice was kind, but I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like the rain. We walked back to my house, the open front door a stark reminder of my frantic escape. Mark insisted on checking every room, his flashlight beam sweeping through the darkness as I waited on the porch, shivering in my drenched clothes. "All clear," he called when he returned, his face reassuring. "No one's here. You're safe." I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Thank you, Mark. And I'm sorry for hitting you. I thought..." He chuckled, rubbing his temple. No harm done. You've got a hell of a swing, though. That candlestick's no joke. I managed to laugh, brittle and strained. I'll never live this down, will I? Not a chance, he said, his grin softening the tension. Get some rest, Clara. It'll look better in the morning. After he left, I locked the door, double-checking every bolt, and headed upstairs to change into dry clothes. As I passed the spot where I'd struck Mark, something caught my eye. A smudge on the hardwood, faint but unmistakable. I knelt, my heart stuttering as I realized it was a muddy footprint, larger than my own, its tread unfamiliar. It pointed toward my bedroom, not away, as it would have if Mark had left it during his search. A chill seeped into my bones, colder than the storm's bite, as the truth crashed over me. Someone had been in my house, and they weren't gone. I grabbed my phone, fully charged now, and dialed 911, my eyes locked on the footprint as I waited for the operator. The storm raged outside, its fury a distant echo compared to the dread pooling in my chest. I gave my statement to the police when they arrived, their flashlights sweeping the house, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no other footprints, just my word against the silence. They promised to patrol the area, but their skeptical glances told me they thought I was paranoid, spooked by a stormy night. As I sat in my bedroom, the lights back on but offering no comfort, the image of that shadowy figure in my doorway burned into my mind. Who were they? What did they want? And most terrifying of all, when would they return? The muddy footprint was gone by morning, washed away by my frantic cleaning, but its memory lingered, a stark reminder that the monsters we fear are sometimes all too real. The storm had passed, but the danger hadn't, and I knew with a certainty that kept me awake long into the night that this was far from over. The rain fell in a merciless cascade, transforming the winding country road into a glistening ribbon of black that shimmered under my headlights. It was well past midnight, and I was bone-weary, my eyes burning from a day of endless meetings in a nondescript office park 2 hours from home. My old hatchback groaned under the strain of the storm, its wipers thrashing futilely against the deluge, each swipe revealing only fleeting glimpses of the world beyond. I was close to home, another 40 minutes, maybe less. But the storm had turned the familiar route through rural Oregon into an alien gauntlet, its winds howling like a chorus of restless ghosts. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles pale, and muttered a prayer for the road to stay clear. That's when I saw him, a lone figure standing on the shoulder, a spectral silhouette caught in the fleeting glow of my high beams. He was drenched, his clothes clinging to his frame like a second skin, his arm extended in a desperate plea for a ride. The sight tugged at something deep within me, a flicker of empathy that warred with the caution ingrained by years of late-night drives. I slowed, my tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and peered through the rain-streaked windshield. He looked harmless enough, mid-30s, maybe with a lean build and a posture that spoke of exhaustion rather than menace. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, to leave this stranger to his fate in the storm. But the thought of him stranded out here, soaked and shivering, gnawed at my conscience. With a reluctant sigh, I pulled over, rolling down the passenger window just enough to let my voice carry over the wind's howl. "You okay out there?" I called, my words nearly swallowed by the storm's fury. He jogged closer, his face breaking into a grin of relief that seemed almost too bright for the circumstances. "Thank God you stopped," he said, his voice warm but strained, as if he'd been shouting into the void for hours. "My truck broke down a few miles back. Been walking forever. Can you help me out?" I studied him for a moment, his features softened by the rain but sharp with desperation. His eyes were tired, shadowed, but there was a flicker in them. Gratitude, I told myself. though a deeper part of me wasn't so sure. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door, the click loud in the confined space of the car. "Hop in," I said, forcing a smile. "Where you headed?" "Just the next town over," he replied, sliding into the passenger seat, water pooling on the upholstery. "There's a motel there. I'll figure things out in the morning. Thanks for this." I was starting to think I'd be out here all night. I nodded, pulling back onto the road, the tires splashing through puddles that reflected the storm's chaos. "I'm Nathan," I said, figuring it was only polite to know the name of the man I'd let into my car. "Rough night to be stuck out there." "Tell me about it," he said, his grin returning, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Lucas." "You're a lifesaver, Nathan." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, and I felt a prickle of unease, a whisper that I'd made a terrible mistake. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic slap of the wipers and the rain's relentless drumbeat on the roof. I stole glances at Lucas, his profile half lit by the dashboard's faint glow. He sat slouched, staring out the window, his hands restless in his lap, fingers twitching as if itching for something to hold. The car smelled of wet denim and something sharper, like metal or sweat, and I tried to shake the growing sense that I'd invited danger into my space. "So," I said, desperate to break the tension, "what brought you out this way? Not exactly tourist season." Lucas turned to me, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes glinted with something cold, something predatory, before his smile snapped back into place. "Oh, just passing through," he said, his tone casual, almost rehearsed. "Had some business to take care of. What about you? You live around here?" I hesitated, my instincts urging me to keep my life private. "Yeah, not far," I said vaguely, my grip tightening on the wheel. "Just heading home from work." I hoped the brevity would shut down the conversation, but Lucas's gaze lingered, probing, as if he could see through my guarded answers. "Must be nice," he said, his voice soft but edged with something I couldn't place. "Quiet out here, away from the city. Bet you've got a nice setup." His words were innocuous, but they landed like stones, heavy with implication. I felt the air in the car shift, growing thicker, more oppressive, as if the storm had seeped inside. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the headlights revealing little beyond the rain's silvery curtain. I tried to focus on driving, on the familiar curves of the route, but Lucas's presence was a weight, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. His hands, I noticed, were no longer restless. They were still, one resting on his knee, the other tucked inside his jacket. The gesture was subtle, but it sent a chill through me, a warning I couldn't ignore. "There's a gas station up ahead," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We could stop, see if they can tow your truck." His hand shot out, gripping my arm with a force that made me flinch. "No," he said, his voice hard, stripped of its earlier warmth. "Keep driving." His fingers dug into my skin, and I glanced at him, my heart racing. The friendly stranger was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes were cold, his jaw set in a line that promised violence. "I think you should get out," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound firm. "Now." Lucas laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that echoed in the cab. "Not happening, Nathan. You're taking me where I want to go, and we're going to have a little chat." His hand moved inside his jacket, and my stomach dropped as he pulled out a knife, its blade glinting in the dashboard's dim light. "First, I want your wallet, then your phone, and then we're taking a detour to your place. Bet a guy like you has some nice stuff." Fear coiled in my chest, a tight, suffocating knot. He knew I lived nearby, or at least he guessed it, and the thought of him in my home, rifling through my life, was unbearable. I had to act, to find a way out before this escalated further. "Okay," I said, forcing calm into my voice. My wallet's in my back pocket. Let me pull over and I'll get it. His grip on the knife tightened, his eyes narrowing. Nice try. Keep driving. I'll get it myself. He leaned across the console, his free hand reaching for my pocket, his body momentarily off balance. It was my only chance. I slammed on the brakes, the car lurching violently, sending Lucas crashing against the dashboard with a sickening thud. Before he could recover, I threw the car into park and lunged for the knife, my hands grappling with his in a desperate struggle. The blade nicked my palm, a sharp sting drowned out by adrenaline. As we wrestled in the cramped space, the storm raging outside like a mirror to our chaos. With a final surge of strength, I wrenched the knife free and flung it into the back seat, where it clattered out of reach. Lucas roared, his fists swinging wildly, landing blows on my arms and chest. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers slick with sweat and blood, and threw it open, tumbling onto the rain-soaked asphalt. Lucas was right behind me, grabbing at my legs as I scrambled to my feet, the ground slick and treacherous underfoot. I slipped, my knees hitting the pavement, and he was on me, his weight pinning me down as we rolled in the mud, each fighting for dominance. My hand closed around a jagged rock, cold and heavy, and without thinking, I swung it with all my might. There was a wet crunch, and Lucas's grip slackened, his body slumping to the ground. I staggered to my feet, panting, my vision blurred by rain and fear. Lucas lay motionless, blood mixing with the puddles around him, his face pale in the headlights' glow. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him, but then he groaned, stirring weakly. Relief and dread warred within me. He was alive, but for how long? And what would he do when he came to? I stumbled back to the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled away, Lucas's form grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a dark shape struggling to rise against the storm's fury. I drove faster than I ever had, the rain-slicked roads a blur as I put distance between us, my heart still pounding with the echo of his threats. When the lights of the next town appeared, a cluster of neon signs glowing through the haze, I nearly wept with relief. I pulled into the police station's lot, my car skidding to a stop, and ran inside. The warmth of the building a stark contrast to the cold terror of the night. The officers listened to my story, their faces shifting from skepticism to concern as I recounted the encounter. My hands still trembling as I showed them the cut on my palm. They sent patrols to search for Lucas, but the storm had washed away most of the evidence, leaving only my word and a vague description. They assured me they'd keep looking, that he couldn't have gotten far. But as I sat in the station, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders and a styrofoam cup of coffee cooling in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Dawn broke over the rain-soaked town, casting a pale, fragile light, but it did little to dispel the darkness that had settled in my bones. I called my boss, my voice hollow as I requested time off, then checked into a motel under a false name, paying in cash to cover my tracks. As I lay on the sagging mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the weight of the night pressed down on me. One moment of compassion, one split-second decision had upended my life, shattering the trust I'd once placed in strangers. Lucas had taken more than my sense of safety. He'd stolen my ability to see the world as benign, to believe in the kindness of others. I don't know if they'll ever find him, if he'll come looking for me, armed with the knowledge of my name and the rough outline of my life. But one thing I know for certain, the next time I see a figure on the roadside, thumb out, drenched and desperate, I'll keep driving, no matter how fiercely the storm rages. The road stretched out behind me, a memory of rain and terror, but the real danger wasn't in the weather. It was in the choices we make. and the phantoms that linger when we let them in. The Evergreen Lodge stood like a forgotten relic on the edge of a sleepy coastal town in Maine, its weathered clapboard facade and wraparound porch promising a quaint escape from the grind of city life. I'd been dreaming of this trip for months, a chance to unplug after a year of relentless deadlines and corporate monotony. The online listing had painted it as a haven, secluded, charming, with glowing reviews praising the host's warmth and attention to detail. As I pulled into the gravel drive, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, a wave of relief washed over me. The lodge was even more inviting in person, its ivy-draped walls and leaded glass windows exuding an old-world charm that felt like a warm embrace. Little did I know this idyllic retreat was a facade, hiding a darkness that would unravel my sense of safety and haunt me for years to come. The host, a wiry man named Elias, greeted me at the door, his smile broad but oddly practiced, his handshake firm to the point of discomfort. "Welcome, Margaret," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood, his eyes lingering a fraction too long. "I've got everything set for you. Hope you'll feel right at home." He carried my bags inside, his chatter about the lodge's history, built in the 1920s, once a summer retreat for wealthy families, filling the air as he gave me a tour. The interior was a blend of rustic elegance and faded grandeur. Polished oak floors, a stone fireplace in the lounge, and a clawfoot tub in the bathroom that promised luxurious soaks. Elias was attentive, almost overly so, pointing out every amenity with a pride that bordered on possessive. "I've left a welcome basket in your room," he said as he handed me the key to room 14, his fingers brushing mine in a way that made my skin prickle. "If you need anything, I'm just a call away. Enjoy your stay." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. And as he drove off in his pickup, I shook off the unease, chalking it up to travel fatigue. The lodge was perfect, a sanctuary of quiet after the chaos of my life, and I was determined to savor it. I spent the evening settling in, unpacking my suitcase and sinking into the plush armchair in my room with a glass of wine from the welcome basket. The space was cozy, with a 4-poster bed draped in soft linens, a vintage dresser, and a window overlooking the misty forest beyond. The silence was a balm, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. I drifted to sleep that night, lulled by the promise of a week of peace, unaware that the lodge was watching me, its secrets hidden in plain sight. The next morning, as I stood in the bathroom brushing my hair, a glint in the mirror's ornate frame caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection of the morning sun filtering through the lace curtains. But as I leaned closer, my heart stuttered. A tiny lens, no larger than a pinhead, nestled in the carved wood, its cold, unblinking eye trained on the room. My breath hitched, my mind racing to rationalize the discovery. A smart home device? A security measure? But the lens was too discreet, too perfectly positioned to capture every inch of the bathroom, and a sickening realization settled in my gut. This was a hidden camera. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call the police, only to find no signal. The lodge's remote location had left me cut off from the world. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. If there was one camera, there could be more. I moved through the room, my eyes scanning every surface with a new, paranoid intensity. In the bedroom, a potted fern concealed another lens, its green leaves a cruel disguise. In the lounge, a smoke detector on the ceiling revealed a telltale glint when I stood on a chair to inspect it. Even the kitchenette's coffee maker hid a camera, its eye embedded in the digital display. Each discovery was a blow, a violation that turned the lodge's charm into a suffocating trap. I was being watched, Every move, every private moment, captured for reasons I couldn't fathom. Was Elias behind this? The overly friendly host with his too perfect reviews? How many others had he spied on? Their vulnerabilities laid bare for his amusement, or worse. I knew I had to leave, to escape this house of eyes before whoever was watching realized I'd uncovered their secret. I threw my belongings into my suitcase, not bothering to fold or organize, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and rage. That's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel outside, the low growl of an engine. Peering through the curtains, my stomach dropped. Elias's pickup was back, parking just beyond the porch. He wasn't supposed to return until the end of my stay. The only explanation was that he'd been watching, had seen me discover the cameras, and was here to ensure my silence. My mind raced for an escape. The front door was out of the question. He'd spot me instantly. The back door led to the dense forest, but without a map or signal, I'd be lost in minutes. Hiding was my only option. I ducked into the bedroom's narrow closet, pulling the door shut behind me, the slats offering a fractured view of the room. My breath was shallow, my body pressed against the wall as the front door creaked open, Elias's footsteps echoing with a slow, deliberate cadence. "Margaret," he called, his voice dripping with false warmth, a sickly sweet veneer that made my skin crawl. "You in here? Just wanted to check if everything's to your liking." His footsteps grew closer, each one a hammer blow to my nerves. "I know you're here, Margaret," he said, his tone shifting, harder now, laced with menace. "I saw you poking around. We need to talk about what you found." My heart pounded so fiercely I was sure he'd hear it, the closet's confines amplifying my fear. Through the slats, I saw his shadow pass, his silhouette looming as he approached the bedroom. "Come on out," he said, his voice low, almost coaxing. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." His hand reached for the closet door, and I knew I had to act. As the door began to open, I burst out, shoving him with all my strength. He stumbled backward, surprise flashing across his face, and I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I sprinted through the bedroom, across the lounge, and out the front door, the gravel biting into my feet as I ran. Elias's shouts followed me, his footsteps pounding on the porch as I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat, his figure growing larger in my peripheral vision. "Margaret, stop!" he yelled, his voice raw with anger. I slammed the door shut, locking it just as he reached the handle, his face twisted into a mask of fury. "You don't know what you're messing with," he snarled, pounding on the window. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the drive. Elias lunged forward, his hands scraping the hood, but I floored the gas, the car lurching onto the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, he grew smaller, a dark figure against the lodge's idyllic facade, but the terror didn't fade. How many other rooms did he have rigged? How many other guests were being watched, their privacy stolen by his hidden eyes? I drove for hours, the coastal road a blur of mist and pine, not stopping until I reached a police station in the next town. The officers listened, their faces hardening as I described the cameras, my phone's photos of the lenses serving as damning evidence. They dispatched units to the lodge, promising a thorough investigation, and took my statement with a gravity that eased my trembling. In the days that followed, the truth unraveled like a nightmare made real. Elias had multiple properties, each a spiderweb of surveillance, with hundreds of hours of footage capturing countless victims. The media dubbed it the Voyeur's Lodge, a scandal that sparked outrage and calls for reform. I was asked to share my story, to give interviews, but I refused, wanting only to bury the memory of those watchful eyes. But forgetting was impossible. Every hotel room, every rental became a minefield of paranoia. I checked mirrors, light fixtures, even electrical outlets, unable to shake the feeling of being observed. Nightmares plagued me. Elias's face distorted and grinning, his voice whispering through hidden speakers. I sought therapy, leaned on friends, and slowly began to rebuild. But the lodge had left its mark, a scar on my sense of trust. I became an advocate for stricter regulations on short-term rentals, a small act of defiance against the violation I'd endured. It wasn't enough to erase the fear, but it gave me purpose, a way to fight back. Now, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by walls I've checked 100 times, I reflect on how quickly sanctuary can turn to prison. The Evergreen Lodge had promised peace, a retreat from the world's chaos, but it delivered only terror, exposing a hidden underbelly of predation I'd never imagined. I still travel, still stay in hotels, but I carry a small device to detect hidden cameras, a talisman against the unknown. Some call it paranoia. I call it survival, because I know now that the real danger isn't always what you see. It's the eyes you don't, watching from the shadows, waiting for you to let your guard down. The old Victorian house stood like a sentinel at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in upstate New York, its gabled roof and stained glass windows exuding a faded grandeur that whispered of forgotten eras. When my college friend Rachel offered me the chance to house sit for a month while she traveled for work, I jumped at the opportunity. My cramped Brooklyn apartment was a claustrophobic cage, and the prospect of a spacious, historic home, complete with a wraparound porch and a garden overrun with wild roses, was too tempting to resist. The timing was perfect. I'd just wrapped a freelance editing project, and the quiet of suburbia promised a chance to recharge, and maybe even start that novel I'd been procrastinating. But as I stepped through the front door, my suitcase thumping against the polished oak floor, a subtle unease settled in my chest, a whisper that this house was more than it seemed. The first week passed in a blissful haze. I settled into a rhythm. Mornings spent working on my laptop in the sunlit study, afternoons exploring the house's labyrinthine rooms, and evenings curled up in the parlor with a book and a glass of wine. The house was a treasure trove of character, creaking floorboards, ornate crown molding, and a grand staircase that spiraled up to a warren of bedrooms. But as the sun dipped below the horizon each night, the house seemed to shift, its warmth giving way to a heavy, watchful silence. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, the hairs on my neck prickling as if unseen eyes tracked my every move. I dismissed it as the jitters of being alone in a strange place, but the feeling grew, a quiet pulse of dread that refused to fade. It was on the 8th night that the first anomaly surfaced. I woke to the aroma of coffee, faint but unmistakable, drifting up from the kitchen. Frowning, I padded downstairs, expecting to find a forgotten pot brewing, but the machine was cold, untouched. The mug I'd left in the sink the night before, crusted with tea leaves, now sat on the counter, sparkling clean and dry. I stood there, my bare feet chilling against the tile, trying to recall if I'd washed it in a late-night haze. I must have, I told myself, but the certainty felt hollow, a bandage over a wound I couldn't yet see. The incidents multiplied, each one small but unnerving, like pebbles piling into an avalanche. A novel I'd left open on the coffee table would be neatly shelved by morning. The remote for the ancient television would migrate from the couch to the mantel. One morning I found the dining room chairs arranged in a perfect circle, as if awaiting an unseen gathering. I began to question my sanity. Was I sleepwalking, misplacing things in a fog of distraction? To ground myself, I started taking photos of the rooms each night, comparing them to the morning's reality. More often than not, subtle shifts emerged. A curtain drawn when I'd left it open, a lamp turned at an unfamiliar angle. The house was moving, rearranging itself in the dark, and I was no longer sure I was its only occupant. By the third week, I was a wreck, my nerves frayed to threads. I slept with the bedroom door locked, a chair wedged under the handle, jumping at every creak of the old house settling. I considered calling Rachel, but what could I say? That her home was playing tricks on me, shifting like a living thing? She'd think I'd lost my mind. The tension came to a head on a stormy Tuesday night. The wind howling outside as I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. A noise jolted me awake, a soft thud, deliberate and close, like something being placed carefully on the floor below. I lay still, my heart hammering, straining to hear over the storm's roar. There it was again, a shuffling sound, slow and purposeful, moving through the house. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, ready to dial 911, but a chilling thought stopped me. What if they'd cut the lines? In every horror movie, that's what the intruder did first. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the rug, and crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. The shuffling had stopped, replaced by something far worse. Breathing, slow and raspy. Just on the other side, I stumbled back. A scream caught in my throat as the doorknob began to turn, its movement agonizingly deliberate. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a heavy crystal paperweight on the dresser. I grabbed it, its weight a cold comfort, and backed into the corner. My body tensed for a fight. The door opened with a low groan, revealing a figure that froze my blood. It was a man, or something like one, impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long, its skin a translucent gray that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its eyes were black voids devoid of pupils, and its mouth hung slack, revealing a glimpse of jagged teeth. For a moment, we stared at each other, the air thick with a primal terror I'd never known. Then it spoke, its voice a dry, echoing rasp that seemed to come from the walls themselves. You weren't meant to see me. The paperweight slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor with a sound that broke the spell. The creature lunged, its movements fluid and inhuman, and I acted on instinct, shoving past it and sprinting down the hallway. Its raspy breath followed, hot and close, as I took the stairs two at a time, nearly tumbling in my haste. My only thought was escape, to reach the front door, my car, the safety of the outside world. But as I reached the foyer, my heart sank. The front door was gone, replaced by a smooth expanse of wall, as if it had never existed. I spun around, searching for another exit, but the house had changed. Windows showed only an endless void. Doors led to unfamiliar rooms, the layout twisting into a nightmare maze. "You can't leave," the creature said, its voice behind me, calm and final. "None of us can." I turned to face it, my back pressed against the impossible wall. Its empty eyes studied me, its head tilted in a mockery of curiosity. "This house, it's alive. It feeds on fear, on despair. You're not the first it's taken, and you won't be the last." I shook my head, refusing to accept its words. "No, this is Rachel's house. She lives here. She..." My voice faltered as the creature let out a sound like a laugh, sharp and hollow. "Rachel doesn't exist," it said, its voice dripping with pity. "She's a lure, a fiction spun by the house to draw in new prey. It's been so long since it had someone fresh to torment." It stepped closer, its feet hovering just above the floor, and I felt the house groan around us, the walls rippling as if alive. A wave of despair crashed over me, and I slid to the floor, my legs giving out. This couldn't be real. A nightmare, a hallucination, anything but the truth. But the creature knelt before me, its face inches from mine. and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something human in its void-like eyes. I tried to warn you, it whispered. The moved objects, the sounds, I wanted you to leave before it was too late, but the house, it's too strong. As if in response, the house shuddered, the floor tilting beneath me, the walls warping into new configurations. Doors vanished and reappeared, the staircase twisting into a spiral that led to darkness. Whispers filled the air, pleading, screaming, laughing, countless voices trapped within the house's hungry embrace. The others, the creature said, noticing my reaction, all caught, like us. Sometimes we see them, sometimes we don't. The house decides. I shook my head, clinging to a shred of defiance. There has to be a way out. We can't just give up. My voice was weak, but it carried a spark of resolve, a refusal to surrender. The creature's expression softened, a shadow of pity crossing its warped features. We never stop trying. We search, we hope, but the house feeds on that, our desperation, our fight. It's all part of its game. As the house's transformation slowed, I found myself in a long corridor, its walls lined with doors of every style, some ancient and splintered, others sleek and modern. The creature stood at the far end, its form fading into the shadows. Survive, it called, its voice growing faint. Explore, and whatever you do, don't trust what you see. Nothing here is real. Then it was gone, leaving me alone in the impossible hallway, the air thick with the house's malevolent presence. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind grappling with the surreal horror of my new reality. Part of me still hoped this was a dream, that I'd wake in my Brooklyn apartment, laughing at the absurdity of it all. But the house's groans, the whispers echoing from unseen rooms, were too vivid, too real. I took a deep breath, my hands still trembling, and faced the doors stretching before me. Each one was a gamble, a potential path to freedom or damnation. With no other choice, I stepped forward and grasped the handle of the nearest door, its wood cold and slick under my fingers. As I turned it, I made a silent vow. I would not become like the creature, a hollow shell consumed by the house's hunger. I would fight, search, survive, no matter how long it took. The door swung open, revealing a room that defied logic. Walls that pulsed like flesh, a ceiling that dripped with shadow. As I stepped through, the whispers grew louder, the house's laughter ringing in my ears, and I knew my nightmare had only just begun. The neon sign of Rosie's 24-hour diner flickered like a dying star against the desolate stretch of Highway 17. Its pink and blue glow, a beacon for weary travelers in the dead of night. I'd been working the graveyard shift here for 7 months, pouring coffee and slinging plates of greasy hash for a revolving cast of truckers, insomniacs, and college kids cramming for exams. My name's Lila, and while the job wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills and gave me quiet hours to scribble ideas for my novel. A sprawling mystery I'd been nurturing since college. The diner was my refuge, a place of predictable rhythms and familiar faces. But tonight, as I wiped down the chipped Formica counter for the 100th time, a restless energy hummed in the air, a premonition that my ordinary shift was about to spiral into a nightmare. The jukebox in the corner played a scratchy rendition of an old Motown hit, its notes barely audible over the hum of the fryer and the occasional clatter from the kitchen, where the cook, a grizzled man named Hank, was flipping burgers. It was just past 2 a.m., the diner nearly empty save for a lone trucker nursing a coffee at the counter and a pair of students hunched over textbooks in a booth. I was refilling the sugar shakers, my movements mechanical, when the bell above the door jingled, sharp and insistent. I looked up, plastering on my practiced smile, but it wavered as 4 men stepped inside, their presence like a cold draft sweeping through the room. They were dressed in dark tailored clothes, too sharp for a roadside dive like Rosie's, and their movements were precise, almost choreographed, as they slid into a corner booth far from the windows. Their faces were hard, etched with a tension that set my nerves on edge, and their eyes darted around the diner, scanning every corner as if expecting an ambush. I grabbed a stack of menus, my instincts whispering that these weren't ordinary customers, and approached their table, my smile now a fragile mask. As I neared, I caught a snippet of their conversation, hushed but urgent. The drop set for dawn. We need to be locked and loaded. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I faltered, my pen hovering over my notepad. "Welcome to Rosie's," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the tremor in my chest. "Can I get you folks started with some coffee?" The man closest to me, a broad-shouldered figure with a jagged scar tracing his jaw, gave a curt nod, his eyes never leaving mine. "Coffee, black, for all of us," he said, his voice low and clipped, like a man used to being obeyed. I jotted it down, more to keep my hands busy than out of necessity, and retreated to the counter, their gazes heavy on my back. My mind raced as I poured the coffee, the pot trembling slightly in my grip. What kind of drop were they planning? Drugs? Guns? The diner, usually a haven of mundane chatter, felt like a stage for something sinister, and I was caught in the spotlight. I set the mugs on their table, careful to avoid eye contact, and asked, "Anything to eat?" More out of habit than expectation. The scarred man shook his head, his expression unyielding. "Just the coffee and some space." His tone was a warning, a line drawn in the sand, and I nodded, retreating with a murmured, "Take your time." Back behind the counter, I busied myself with mindless tasks, restocking napkins, wiping down already clean surfaces, while keeping one ear tuned to their booth. Their voices were too low to catch words, but the urgency was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button, but hesitated. What would I tell the police? That I'd overheard a vague, ominous conversation? Without proof, I'd sound paranoid. And Rosie's wasn't exactly a hub of criminal activity. I decided to wait, to watch, hoping to glean more before acting. An hour ticked by, the men nursing their coffees, their heads bent close in discussion. The trucker left, tossing a tip on the counter, and the students packed up, their laughter a jarring contrast to the tension radiating from the corner booth. I refilled the men's cups, my movements careful, their occasional glances like pinpricks on my skin. Then, everything changed in an instant. The bell jingled again, and two police officers strolled in, their uniforms crisp against the diner's worn decor. It was a common sight. Cops often stopped by for a late-night coffee. But the reaction from the men was immediate and electric. They stiffened, hands disappearing beneath the table, and I caught the glint of metal in the scarred man's grip. A gun, unmistakable and deadly. My heart lurched, time slowing to a crawl as the officers ambled toward the counter, oblivious to the danger. The men in the booth were poised like predators, their eyes locked on the cops, fingers twitching with intent. I stood frozen, caught between them, the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. If I did nothing, this could end in blood, a shootout in my diner, lives lost in an instant. I had to act to defuse the situation before it exploded. Taking a deep breath, I stepped toward the officers, positioning myself so my back shielded the booth, and pitched my voice loud enough to carry. "Hey, officers. Good to see you," I said, forcing cheer into my tone, my eyes wide with a silent plea for them to notice my distress. "The usual tonight? Coffee and a couple of donuts?" The older cop, a regular named Sergeant Malone, caught the edge of my voice, his hand drifting casually to his holster. Actually, Lila, he said, his gaze sweeping the diner. We got a tip about some suspicious activity nearby. You seen anything odd tonight? I shook my head, my pulse pounding as I felt the men's eyes boring into my back. Nope, just the usual crowd, I said, emphasizing the word usual in a desperate bid to signal trouble. A few regulars, some folks passing through. Malone's eyes narrowed, catching my meaning, and he nodded slowly. Mind if we take a look around? He asked, his tone calm but authoritative. Just routine. Of course, I said, relief flooding through me, though the tension in the air was still taut as a wire. Coffee's on the house tonight. As the officers moved toward the booth, I heard the scrape of chairs, the men rising with a coiled energy that screamed danger. Gentlemen, Malone said, his voice steady. Mind if we have a word? What happened next was a blur of chaos. Two of the men bolted for the door, their boots pounding on the linoleum, while the scarred man reached into his jacket, his movements swift and lethal. Gun! Someone shouted, and the air shattered with the deafening crack of gunfire. I dove behind the counter, my hands over my ears, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. Shouts filled the diner, mingled with the crash of breaking glass and the screech of overturning tables. I curled into a ball, the world reduced to noise and fear, until an eerie silence descended, heavy and final. Trembling, I peeked over the counter, my eyes struggling to make sense of the wreckage. Tables were toppled, coffee mugs shattered on the floor, and one of the men lay motionless near the door, blood pooling beneath him. The officers had the scarred man in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage, while the other two had vanished into the night. Malone approached, his expression grim but kind. You okay, Lila? He asked, helping me to my feet. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, the adrenaline still coursing through me. You did good, he said, his hand steady on my shoulder. Your call saved lives tonight. I blinked, confused. My call? He gave a faint smile, understanding flashing in his eyes. The one you made an hour ago, reporting suspicious customers. That's why we were here. I hadn't made any call, but I grasped his meaning instantly. He was giving me an out, a way to explain my actions without painting a target on my back. I nodded, grateful, as the weight of the night settled over me. The next few hours were a whirlwind of police statements, crime scene investigators, and hushed conversations among officials in suits. I learned fragments of the truth. The men were part of a drug trafficking ring. The drop, a massive shipment of fentanyl set to flood the region. My overheard conversation had inadvertently disrupted a major operation, and the police were calling it a lucky break. As dawn broke, casting a surreal glow over the yellow crime scene tape strung across the diner's entrance, I sat on the curb, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, a cup of coffee from a nearby gas station warming my hands. Malone joined me, his face lined with fatigue. Hell of a night, huh? He said, handing me a fresh cup. You handled yourself like a pro in there, Lila? Ever thought about law enforcement? I laughed, the sound brittle and slightly hysterical. I think I'll stick to pouring coffee and writing my book. Thanks. But even as I said it, a spark of something new flickered within me. A realization that I'd faced the worst night of my life and come out stronger. He nodded, standing to leave. Get some rest. We'll need you at the station later for a full statement. As he walked away, I stared at the diner. Its familiar facade now alien, transformed by the violence it had witnessed. Every booth would be a reminder, every customer a potential threat. But beneath the fear was a quiet pride. I'd acted, risked everything, and maybe saved lives. I stood, letting the blanket fall, and walked to my car, the first light of day painting the sky in hues of golden rose. Rosie's would never be the same, but neither would I. The terror had unlocked something, a well of courage, a story I'd carry into my writing and beyond. As I drove away, the diner shrinking in my rearview mirror, I smiled faintly. Life at Rosie's had changed, but so had I, and I was ready to write the next chapter, one where fear was just the beginning. The storm descended like a living beast, its winds howling across the open plains of Nebraska, turning our family road trip into a desperate race against nature's fury. My wife, Ellen, gripped the dashboard of our minivan, her knuckles pale as she peered through the rain-streaked windshield. Our two kids, Lila, 11, and Ben, 9, huddled in the back seat, their usual bickering silenced by the storm's relentless assault. We'd been driving for hours, chasing the promise of a summer vacation in the Black Hills. But the weather had other plans. A massive front that seemed to materialize from nowhere, swallowing the highway in sheets of rain and flashes of lightning. The wipers thrashed futilely, each swipe revealing only fleeting glimpses of the road. And I knew we couldn't keep going. Not like this. "Tom, we have to stop," Ellen said, her voice tight with worry, her eyes scanning the endless expanse of sodden fields. "It's too dangerous." I nodded, squinting into the deluge, my hands aching from their grip on the steering wheel. "I know. I'll pull over at the next town or gas station." But as the minutes dragged on, it became clear we were in the middle of nowhere. No signs, no lights, just a desolate stretch of highway flanked by wind-whipped cornstalks. The kids were growing restless, Ben's small voice trembling as he asked if we'd be okay, and I forced a reassuring smile, though my own unease was mounting. That's when we saw it, a house looming out of the storm like a phantom, its silhouette stark against a jagged bolt of lightning. It was a sprawling, Gothic structure, its steeply pitched roof and boarded windows giving it the look of a place long abandoned. It stood alone on a low rise, surrounded by a tangle of overgrown weeds, its presence both a lifeline and a warning. "Look," Lila exclaimed, pointing with a mix of excitement and fear. "A house! Can we stop there, Dad?" I hesitated, my gut twisting at the sight of the place. The house seemed to radiate a quiet menace, its dark windows like eyes watching our approach. But another crack of thunder, followed by Ben's muffled whimper, made the decision for me. "Okay," I said, turning onto a rutted gravel drive that led to the house. "Just until the storm passes, we'll be fine." Ellen shot me a wary glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you sure about this, Tom? It looks empty." "It'll be okay," I said, projecting more confidence than I felt. "We just need shelter for a bit." We pulled up to the house, the van's tires crunching on the gravel, and I took in the full scope of its decay. Paint peeled from the warped siding, and the porch sagged under the weight of years, its railings splintered and moss-covered. The storm's roar seemed to quiet as we stepped out, as if the house itself were holding its breath. We dashed through the rain to the porch, the boards creaking ominously under our weight. The front door was slightly ajar, its hinges rusted and silent as I pushed it open, revealing a cavernous foyer shrouded in shadow. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing into the darkness. "Anyone here?" No answer came, only the faint drip of water leaking through the ceiling. I switched on my phone's flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a space frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture draped in tattered sheets, cobwebs strung like lace in the corners, and a musty smell that clung to the air. "Well," I said, forcing cheer into my voice for the kids' sake, "looks like we've got the place to ourselves. Let's see if we can get warm." We moved deeper into the house, our wet shoes leaving tracks on the grimy hardwood. The living room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its hearth cold and dark, surrounded by sagging armchairs and a warped coffee table. After rummaging through a corner, I found a pile of brittle logs and some yellowed newspapers, and with a few matches from my pack, I coaxed a small fire to life. The flames cast flickering shadows, their warmth a fragile comfort against the storm's chill. Lila and Ben huddled close, their earlier excitement fading into quiet unease. "This place is creepy," Ben whispered, his eyes wide as he clutched Ellen's hand. "It feels wrong." "It's just an old house, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair, though my own nerves were fraying. The house was too still, its silence too heavy, as if it were listening. Ellen squeezed my arm, her voice low. "Maybe we should find a bedroom. Get the kids settled. They're exhausted." I nodded, grateful for the suggestion, and we gathered our things, heading up the creaking staircase to the second floor. The hallway was a maze of closed doors, each one weathered and uninviting. We chose the first bedroom we found, a large room with a heavy iron bed frame and a mattress that smelled of mildew but was dry enough to serve. Ellen tucked the kids in, their small forms swallowed by the oversized bed, while I decided to check the rest of the upstairs, needing to ease the growing knot in my chest. Most of the rooms were in similar states of decay: broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and decades of dust. But at the end of the hall, one door stood out, its wood polished to a dark sheen, its brass knob gleaming as if recently cleaned. My hand hovered over it, a chill running through me, but curiosity won out. I turned the knob, and the door swung open silently, revealing a room that stole my breath. Unlike the rest of the house, this space was pristine, a snapshot of another time. The bed was neatly made, its quilts vibrant and untouched by dust. Books lined a shelf in perfect order, their spines uncracked. And in a rocking chair by the window sat a porcelain doll, its delicate face illuminated by a flash of lightning, its glass eyes glinting with an eerie life, its painted smile sharp and knowing. I backed out, my heart racing, and slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. It was just a doll, I told myself, just a creepy antique in a creepy house. But the image of those eyes lingered, a silent accusation that followed me back to our room. Ellen was just tucking in Ben, her face pale as she noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I lied, not wanting to alarm her. "Just tired. Long day." We settled in, the storm's rhythmic pounding lulling us into an uneasy sleep, the kids' soft breathing a fragile anchor in the dark. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, the room cloaked in pitch black, the fire long extinguished. Something had roused me, a sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from the hallway. I sat up, straining to hear over the storm's muted roar. Footsteps, light and deliberate, echoed outside our door, followed by a sound that sent ice through my veins. A child's laughter, high and melodic, but wrong, threaded with a darkness that didn't belong. It wasn't Lila or Ben. They were still asleep, their forms barely visible in the gloom. "Ellen," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Wake up. Do you hear that?" She stirred, blinking in confusion. "Hear what?" But before I could answer, the laughter came again, closer now, drifting from the staircase. Ellen's eyes widened, her hand gripping mine. "Tom, what's going on?" "I don't know," I said, slipping out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floor. "Stay with the kids, I'll check it out." Ignoring her protests, I grabbed my phone's flashlight and eased the door open, the hallway stretching into shadow. The laughter echoed again, now from below, a siren call laced with menace. I followed it, my heart hammering, each step on the creaking stairs a test of my nerve. In the living room, I froze. A girl stood in the center, her back to me, her long hair cascading down a tattered nightgown that seemed to glow in the dark. She was small, no older than Lila, but her presence filled the room with a weight that pressed against my chest. "Hello," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you lost?" Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take an eternity, she turned and I stumbled back. A scream caught in my throat. Her face was identical to the doll's, porcelain white, with glass eyes that blinked unnaturally and a painted smile that stretched too wide. But this was no doll. Her movements were alive, deliberate, her gaze locking onto mine with a hunger that chilled my soul. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice a blend of childish sweetness and something ancient, predatory. "This is our home and you'll never leave." As if on cue, the house erupted in chaos. Doors slammed shut, their echoes reverberating through the walls. From upstairs, Ellen's scream pierced the air, followed by the terrified cries of Lila and Ben. I turned to run to them, but the staircase was gone, replaced by a smooth wall that pulsed like living flesh. The girls' laughter multiplied, a chorus of voices filling the room, the walls warping and stretching into impossible shapes. Faces flickered in the peeling wallpaper, their mouths moving in silent screams, and the floorboards whispered secrets I couldn't bear to hear. "Welcome home," the girl said, her smile widening until it seemed to split her face. "We've been waiting for a new family." The room spun, the air thick with the house's malevolent will, and I knew we were trapped, claimed by a place that fed on our fear. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, Ellen shaking me, her face pale with worry. "Tom, wake up! It was a nightmare!" I blinked, disoriented, the room solid and real around me, the kids sleeping soundly in the bed. Outside, the storm had passed, dawn's first light seeping through the dusty curtains. "We need to go," I said, leaping out of bed, my voice hoarse with urgency. "Now!" Ellen didn't argue, sensing the raw panic in my eyes. We woke the kids, packed in a frenzy, and fled to the van, the house looming behind us like a predator watching its prey escape. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart stuttering as I saw a small figure in an upstairs window, its porcelain hand raised in a mocking farewell. I blinked, and it was gone, but the chill remained, a certainty that we'd brushed against something unspeakable. We never spoke of that night, bearing it like a wound too raw to touch. But in my dreams, I still hear that laughter, see those glass eyes watching from the dark. The house is out there, waiting, its hunger patient and eternal. And I wonder, with a dread that never fades, what might have happened if we'd stayed just a moment longer in the place that claimed us as its own. The cabin nestled deep in the Vermont woods was a vision of rustic serenity, its cedar walls and slanted roof framed by a canopy of ancient pines that whispered in the autumn breeze. I'd been yearning for this getaway for months, a reprieve from the soul-crushing pace of my tech job in Boston. The Airbnb listing had been a siren call, secluded, cozy with a stone fireplace and a promise of solitude that felt like a balm for my frayed nerves. The host, a man named Victor, boasted a flawless rating, his reviews gushing about his thoughtfulness and the cabin's charm. As I wound my way down the gravel road, the late afternoon sun dappling the forest floor, a wave of anticipation washed over me. The cabin was even lovelier than the photos, its wide porch adorned with rocking chairs and a wind chime that sang softly in the quiet. But beneath the idyllic surface, a shadow waited, one that would transform my sanctuary into a nightmare I'd never escape. Victor was there to greet me, a lanky man in his 40s with a warm smile and eyes that lingered a touch too long, his handshake firm but oddly possessive. "Welcome, Claire," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, carrying my suitcase with an ease that belied his slight frame. "I've got everything ready for you. Hope you'll find the place as special as I do." He led me inside, his chatter about the cabin's history, a 19th century hunting lodge, lovingly restored, filling the air as he pointed out the amenities. A stocked kitchen with a gleaming espresso machine, a bathroom with a deep soaking tub, and a loft bedroom with a skylight that framed the stars. His enthusiasm was infectious, but there was something in his manner, too eager, too watchful, that set my nerves on edge. "I've left a welcome basket on the counter," Victor said, handing me the key, his fingers grazing mine in a way that made my skin prickle. "Call me if you need anything. Enjoy your stay." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes, and as his truck rumbled away, I shook off the unease, blaming it on the long drive and my overactive imagination. The cabin was perfect, a haven of warmth and quiet, and I was determined to savor every moment of my week-long retreat. I spent the evening unpacking, the scent of cedar and wood smoke wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. The living room was a cozy haven, with a plush sofa, a woven rug, and a fireplace that crackled to life with a few logs from the neatly stacked pile. I poured a glass of wine from the welcome basket, sank into the sofa, and let the silence of the woods wash away the city's clamor. The cabin felt like a gift, a rare chance to breathe, and I drifted to sleep that night, lulled by the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, unaware that I was already under scrutiny, my every move cataloged by unseen eyes. The next morning, as I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth, a glint in the corner of the mirror caught my attention. It was subtle, a fleeting spark I might have dismissed as sunlight reflecting off the faucet. But as I leaned closer, my heart stuttered. A tiny lens, no bigger than a bead, embedded in the mirror's carved frame, its cold, unblinking eye trained on the room. My breath caught, my mind scrambling for a benign explanation. A smart home sensor? A quirky design feature? But the lens was too discreet, too perfectly positioned to capture every angle of the bathroom, and a sickening truth settled in my gut. I was being watched. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call the police, only to find no signal. The cabin's remote location had severed me from the outside world. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. If there was one camera, there could be others. I moved through the cabin with a new paranoid intensity, my eyes scanning every surface for signs of betrayal. In the bedroom, a decorative clock on the nightstand hid another lens, its face a cruel disguise. In the living room, a faux smoke detector on the ceiling revealed a telltale glint when I climbed onto a chair to inspect it. Even the kitchen's sleek kettle concealed a camera, its eye nestled in the digital display. Each discovery was a violation, a crack in the cabin's facade, transforming my refuge into a prison of surveillance. I was being spied on, every step, every private moment, captured for reasons I couldn't comprehend. Was Victor behind this? The overly attentive host with his impeccable reviews? How many others had he watched? Their vulnerabilities laid bare for his amusement or worse. I knew I had to escape, to flee this house of hidden eyes before whoever was watching realized I'd uncovered their secret. I threw my belongings into my suitcase, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and fury, not bothering to fold or organize. That's when I heard it, the low rumble of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Peering through the blinds, my stomach dropped. Victor's truck was back, parking just beyond the porch. He wasn't supposed to return until my checkout. The only explanation was that he'd been watching, had seen me discover the cameras, and was here to ensure my silence. My mind raced for an escape route. The front door was a trap. He'd see me in seconds. The back door led to the dense forest, but without a map or signal, I'd be lost in the underbrush. Hiding was my only option. I slipped into the bedroom's cramped closet, pulling the door shut, the slats offering a splintered view of the room. My breath was shallow, my body pressed against the wall as the front door creaked open. Victor's footsteps, heavy and deliberate on the hardwood. "Claire?" he called, his voice dripping with false warmth, a veneer that made my skin crawl. "You here? Just checking in to make sure everything's all right." His footsteps grew closer, each one a hammer blow to my nerves. "I know you're in here, Claire," he said, his tone hardening, the pretense slipping. "I saw you snooping around. We need to talk about what you found." My heart pounded so fiercely I was sure he'd hear it, the closet's confines amplifying my fear. Through the slats, I saw his shadow pass, his silhouette looming as he entered the bedroom. "Come out, Claire," he said, his voice low, almost coaxing. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." His hand reached for the closet door, and I knew I had to act. As the door began to open, I burst out, shoving him with all my strength. He stumbled backward, surprise flashing across his face, and I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I sprinted through the bedroom, across the living room, and out the front door, the gravel biting into my sneakers as I ran. Victor's shouts followed, his footsteps pounding on the porch as I reached my car. "Claire, stop!" he yelled, his voice raw with anger. I fumbled with my keys, my hands slick with sweat, his figure growing larger in my peripheral vision. I slammed the door shut, locking it just as he reached the handle, his face twisted into a mask of rage. "You don't know what you're messing with," he snarled, pounding on the window with a force that shook the frame. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The engine roared to life and I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the drive. Victor lunged forward, his hands scraping the hood, but I floored the gas, the car lurching onto the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, he grew smaller, a dark figure against the cabin's deceptively serene facade, but the terror didn't fade. How many other cabins did he have? How many other guests were being watched, their lives exposed to his hidden lenses? I drove for hours, the forest road a blur of green and gray, not stopping until I reached a police station in the nearest town. The officers listened, their faces hardening as I described the cameras, my phone's photos of the lenses serving as irrefutable evidence. They dispatched units to the cabin, promising a thorough investigation, and took my statement with a gravity that eased my trembling. In the weeks that followed, the truth unraveled like a horror story made real. Victor had a network of properties, each rigged with surveillance, capturing thousands of hours of footage from countless victims. The media dubbed it the Woodland Watcher case, a scandal that sparked outrage and calls for reform. I was asked to give interviews, to share my story, but I declined, wanting only to bury the memory of those unseen eyes. But forgetting was impossible. Every hotel room, every rental became a labyrinth of suspicion. I checked mirrors, light fixtures, even power strips, unable to shake the feeling of being observed. Nightmares plagued me. Victor's face distorted and grinning, his voice whispering through hidden speakers. I sought therapy, leaned on friends, and slowly began to rebuild. But the cabin had left its mark, a scar on my trust in the world. I became an advocate for stricter regulations on short-term rentals, a small act of defiance against the violation I'd endured. It wasn't enough to erase the fear, but it gave me purpose, a way to reclaim some control. Now, sitting in my Boston apartment, surrounded by walls I've scoured for hidden devices, I reflect on how quickly peace can turn to peril. The cabin had promised a retreat, a chance to heal, but it delivered only terror, exposing a dark undercurrent of predation I'd never imagined. I still travel, still stay in hotels, but I carry a small detector for hidden cameras, a talisman against the unknown. Some call it paranoia. I call it survival. Because I know now that the real danger isn't always what you see. It's the eyes you don't, watching from the shadows, waiting for you to let your guard down. The Adirondack wilderness stretched before me like a vast, untamed canvas. Its rolling hills and dense forests, a siren call to my restless spirit. I'd always been a hiker, drawn to the solitude of trails where the world's noise fell away. But this was my first attempt at a week-long solo trek, a personal challenge to test my limits and find some clarity amid the chaos of my life. I'd spent months preparing, poring over maps, investing in lightweight gear, and training until my legs were steel and my resolve unshakable. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. Crisp autumn air, trails carpeted with crimson leaves, and a silence so profound it felt sacred. As I set up camp on the second night, the sunset painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and violet, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. But by the third day, that peace would shatter, my adventure twisting into a desperate fight for survival against a predator I couldn't see. It started with a feeling, a subtle prickle on the back of my neck, as if the forest gaze had turned from indifferent to watchful. I was deep in the backcountry, miles from the nearest road, my pack heavy with supplies as I followed a narrow trail through a grove of towering hemlocks. At first I dismissed the sensation as paranoia, the natural unease of being alone in a place where help was a distant dream. But as the day wore on, the feeling intensified, a quiet alarm that refused to be ignored. Small signs began to emerge, a twig snapping when I'd stopped to rest, a rustle of leaves when the wind was still. Once I swore I saw a shadow flit between the trees, swift and humanoid, but when I turned, the forest was empty, its silence mocking my unease. That night, as I huddled in my tent, the forest chorus seemed amplified, each sound a potential threat. An owl's hoot made me flinch, my hand reaching for the flashlight clipped to my pack. The scurry of a small animal near the tent sent my heart racing, my fingers gripping the handle of my multi-tool, its blade a meager defense against the unknown. I tried to rationalize my fear. Deer, raccoons, the usual suspects of the wild. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, a presence that didn't belong. Sleep came in fitful bursts, my dreams haunted by fleeting glimpses of eyes in the dark, glowing with a hunger I couldn't name. I woke at dawn, groggy and on edge, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I crawled from my tent, my breath caught. There in the soft dirt around my campsite were footprints, unmistakably human, their tread deep and unfamiliar. They didn't match my boots, their size larger, their pattern aggressive, circling my tent in a deliberate ring. My blood ran cold as I traced their path, noting how close they'd come, close enough that whoever made them could have reached out and touched the nylon walls while I slept, vulnerable and unaware. The realization was a physical blow, a violation that turned the forest from a sanctuary into a hunting ground. I packed up in a frenzy, my hands shaking as I stuffed gear into my pack, all thoughts of continuing the trek abandoned. My only goal was to reach civilization, to escape whatever stalked me. But as I hit the trail, the sense of being watched grew stronger, a weight that pressed against my chest with every step. I spun around every few minutes, certain I'd catch a glimpse of my pursuer, but the path behind me was always empty, the trees standing sentinel in their silent conspiracy. The signs persisted, a broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss there, subtle markers that screamed of pursuit to my heightened senses. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the ache in my legs and the sweat soaking my clothes. The nearest town was 2 days away at my planned pace, but I was determined to make it in one, driven by a fear that bordered on primal. I stopped only to gulp water, my breath ragged, my eyes scanning the underbrush for movement. As afternoon bled into evening, the sky darkened with ominous clouds, and a low rumble of thunder echoed through the valley. The rain began as a drizzle, then escalated into a torrent, turning the trail into a muddy quagmire that sucked at my boots. I knew I should stop, pitch my tent, and wait out the storm, but the thought of my stalker closing in kept me moving, my headlamp casting eerie shadows that danced like specters in the corners of my vision. A flash of lightning illuminated the trail ahead, and my heart stopped. There, no more than 20 feet away, stood a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, its outline blurred by the rain. Its head turned, and for a split second, our gazes locked. Where its eyes should have been were hollow sockets, black and endless, radiating a malice that froze my blood. I screamed, the sound lost in a crack of thunder, and turned, running blindly into the forest, branches whipping at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. The figure pursued, its movements fluid and relentless, keeping pace effortlessly despite the treacherous terrain. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, tumbling down a steep embankment, pain exploding in my ankle as I hit the bottom. I lay there, the rain pelting my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, descending the slope. Terror gripped me, a primal urge to flee warring with the agony in my leg. Slowly I rolled over, bracing for the sight of those hollow eyes, but there was nothing. Just the rain-soaked forest, silent save for the storm's roar. A twig snapped to my left and I whipped my head around. Nothing. Another snap, this time to my right, still nothing. It was toying with me, I realized, savoring my fear, a predator playing with its prey. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I forced myself to my feet, using a tree for support. I couldn't stay here, couldn't wait for it to strike. I limped forward, each step a battle, the forest a maze of shadows and threats. Every rustle, every gust was a potential attack, and I felt the weight of its presence, a constant pressure at my back. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what hunted me. A psychopath stalking hikers? A hermit driven mad by isolation? Or something else? Something not of this world? The questions looped endlessly, unanswered, as I pushed on, driven by a desperate need to survive. Ahead, through the trees, I saw a flicker of light. Faint, but real, a beacon in the darkness. Hope surged, giving me strength as I hobbled toward it, the light resolving into the glow of electric lamps. A ranger station, solid and tangible, its windows bright against the forest gloom. With a final burst of energy, I stumbled to the door, pounding on it with what little strength remained. "Help!" I croaked, my voice hoarse from hours of fear. "Please, someone!" The door opened, and I nearly collapsed into the arms of a startled ranger, a young woman with wide eyes and a concerned frown. "Whoa, easy," she said, helping me inside. "What happened to you?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a jumbled rush. Footprints, pursuit, the figure in the lightning. She listened, her expression growing graver with each word, and guided me to a chair, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders and pressing a mug of hot tea into my hands. "You're safe now," she said, her voice steady but laced with something unspoken. "We'll figure this out." As she called for backup, I glanced out the window, the forest pressing close to the station, its darkness impenetrable. Was it still out there? Watching, waiting. The next few days were a blur of police interviews and medical exams. They found my abandoned campsite, the footprints confirming part of my story, but no trace of my pursuer, no tracks, no evidence of anyone else in the area. Most dismissed my account as a product of fear, a mind spooked by the wilderness's natural sounds. Some suggested a stress-induced hallucination, a breakdown brought on by isolation. Only the ranger who'd found me seemed to believe, her voice low as she spoke to me alone. "These mountains are old," she said, her eyes distant. "They hold things most folks wouldn't believe. Whatever you saw, be glad you made it out." I returned to Boston, my ankle braced and my nerves raw. But the forest shadow clung to me. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Those hollow sockets, that relentless pursuit, the certainty that it wasn't finished with me. I haven't camped since. The wilderness, once a source of freedom, now a realm of terror. But I know it was real, that something hunts in the Adirondacks, patient and eternal. I stick to the city now, its concrete a shield against the wild, but a part of me knows I'll face those woods again. Until I do, until I confront the stalker that marked me, I'll never be free of the fear that trails me like a shadow, waiting for its moment to strike. The glass and steel monolith of Pinnacle Towers loomed over downtown Pittsburgh, its mirrored facade reflecting the city's restless pulse even in the dead of night. I'd been working as a night janitor here for 8 months, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans in a building that buzzed with ambition by day, but sank into an eerie stillness after hours. My name's Caleb, and while the job was far from my dream of becoming a playwright, it paid the rent and left me long stretches of solitude to draft scenes for my latest script. A gritty drama about secrets buried in corporate corridors. Tonight, as I pushed my cart through the deserted lobby, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, a restless unease stirred in my gut, a whisper that this shift would unravel into something far beyond the ordinary. Pinnacle Towers was a beast of a building, 45 floors of sleek offices and conference rooms, its arteries pulsing with the deals and dramas of the city's elite. My routine was methodical. Start at the ground floor, work my way up floor by floor, polishing surfaces and vacuuming carpets until dawn. The silence was my companion, broken only by the soft whir of my equipment and the occasional ping of the elevator. I was used to the building's quirks, the groans of settling steel, the flicker of lights in empty hallways. But tonight, every sound seemed amplified, every shadow sharper, as if the tower itself were watching, waiting. It was around 2 a.m., midway through my rounds on the 42nd floor, when I heard it, a muffled thud, like a heavy file cabinet slamming shut, followed by the low murmur of voices. I froze, my hand still on the vacuum's handle, the hum of the machine fading into the background. The 42nd floor was supposed to be vacant, its tenant, a tech startup, having vacated weeks ago. The entire building should have been empty at this hour, save for the security guard dozing at the front desk. I switched off the vacuum, the sudden silence pressing against my ears, and listened. There it was again, voices urgent and hushed, drifting from the direction of the executive suites. My pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and dread coiling in my chest. Was it a break-in? Squatters? Or just some overzealous executives burning the midnight oil? I reached for my radio, my thumb hovering over the call button, but hesitated. If I alerted security and it turned out to be nothing, I'd face a lecture from my supervisor, who had little patience for overreactions. But the voices persisted, their tone laced with a tension that set my nerves on edge. Swallowing my doubt, I decided to investigate, leaving my cart behind and moving quietly toward the source, my sneakers silent on the plush carpet. The 42nd floor was a maze of glass-walled offices and cubicles, their surfaces gleaming under the dim emergency lights. The voices grew clearer as I approached the corner suite, its frosted glass door ajar, spilling a sliver of light into the hallway. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding, and strained to listen. "The shipment's due tomorrow night," a voice said, low and commanding. "We need to be ready." Another responded, "What about the feds?" "That agent's been sniffing around." "Don't worry," the first voice said, cold and final. "She's been handled." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a late-night meeting. This was a conspiracy, something illegal, something deadly. I edged closer, my breath shallow, trying to peek through the gap in the door without being seen. Inside, 3 men stood around a conference table littered with blueprints and documents, their faces taut with focus. One, a burly man with a shaved head, gestured at the papers, his voice sharp. "The boss wants this clean. No mistakes this time." The others nodded, their expressions grim, and I leaned in, desperate to catch more. That's when disaster struck. My foot caught on a loose cable snaking across the floor, and I stumbled, my shoulder brushing against the wall with a dull thud. The voices cut off like a snapped wire, replaced by a tense silence that pressed against my chest. "What was that?" one of them hissed. "Someone's out there. Check it out," another ordered. And I heard the scrape of chairs, the heavy tread of boots moving toward the door. Panic surged through me, a white-hot wave that drowned out reason. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth, my only thought to escape before they found me. The hallway stretched endlessly, the emergency lights casting long shadows that seemed to chase me as I sprinted for the stairwell. I burst through the fire door, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning as I descended. Behind me, shouts echoed, harsh and commanding, followed by the slam of the stairwell door above. "He's heading down," one of them yelled, their footsteps pounding in pursuit. I pushed myself harder, the 42nd floor giving way to the 40th, then the 38th, my legs screaming with each step. The men were gaining, their voices closer, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. I was faster, but they had numbers, and the thought of what they'd do if they caught me fueled my desperation. At the 30th floor, a reckless idea struck me. Instead of continuing down, I burst onto the floor, weaving through a labyrinth of cubicles and filing cabinets. The darkness, my only ally. The men cursed behind me, their footsteps faltering as they navigated the unfamiliar terrain. I reached the far side of the floor and found the second stairwell, yanking the door open and plunging back into the descent. My gamble paid off. By the time I heard them enter the second stairwell, I was nearing the ground floor, my chest heaving, my vision blurred with sweat. I exploded into the lobby, startling the night guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, who looked up from his crossword with wide eyes. "Call the police," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "There are men upstairs. They're—" Before I could finish, the stairwell door burst open, and 2 of the men charged in, their faces contorted with rage. They skidded to a stop at the sight of Frank, who was already on his feet, one hand on his radio, the other hovering near his baton. For a moment, we stood frozen, a tableau of fear and confusion. Then the burly man smiled, a cold, calculated grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Just a misunderstanding," he said smoothly, gesturing at me. "Our buddy here had a few too many at the office happy hour. We're just trying to get him home safe." Frank's eyes darted between us, uncertainty clouding his face. I opened my mouth to protest, to spill the truth about what I'd heard, but the second man's hand moved slowly to his jacket, a subtle threat that stopped my words cold. In that moment, I made a choice. I turned and bolted through the lobby doors, the cold night air hitting me like a slap as I sprinted into the street. Shouts followed, but I didn't look back, my legs carrying me through the city's empty arteries until I was sure I'd lost them. I ended up in a 24-hour coffee shop, my hands shaking as I nursed a bitter cup of decaf, the events of the night replaying in a relentless loop. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We know who you are. Stay quiet if you want to live." My blood froze, the message a stark reminder that they'd found my number. that they knew more about me than I could bear. I spent the rest of the night in a haze of paranoia, jumping at every sound, convinced every passing car was theirs. When dawn broke, I stood outside the police station, my resolve wavering. Would they believe me? I had no proof, just my word against theirs. And if these men were as connected as they seemed, reporting them could paint a target on my back. In the end, I walked away, my heart heavy with the weight of my silence. I quit my job that day, citing a vague family emergency, and moved out of my apartment the following week, leaving no forwarding address. I'm in a new city now, with a new name and a job mopping floors at a community center. But the echoes of that night cling to me like a second skin. Every man in a suit, every footstep behind me sends me back to that stairwell, running for my life. I don't know what I stumbled into, drug trafficking, corporate espionage, or something darker. But I know it was real, a glimpse into a world of shadows that operates just beneath the surface. The script I once poured my heart into sits unfinished. Its pages, a reminder of the life I left behind. But in its place, a new story is taking shape. One written in fear and survival, a cautionary tale for anyone who hears something they shouldn't in the quiet of the night. My advice is simple. Run and don't look back. Because once you've heard the echoes of the 42nd floor, there's no returning to the blissful ignorance that once kept you safe. The old Queen Anne house stood like a forgotten matriarch on a quiet street in Salem, Massachusetts. Its turreted silhouette and wraparound porch draped in the soft glow of dusk. When my friend Elise asked me to house sit for a month while she embarked on a research trip abroad, I leapt at the chance. My tiny studio apartment in Boston was a claustrophobic trap, and the promise of a grand, historic home, complete with leaded glass windows and a garden tangled with ivy, was a dream come true. The timing was impeccable. I just finished a freelance graphic design contract, and the prospect of uninterrupted solitude to sketch and maybe start a new portfolio felt like a gift. But as I crossed the threshold, my suitcase wheels creaking on the polished hardwood, a faint unease settled in my bones, a whisper that this house held secrets far darker than its elegant facade suggested. The first few days were idyllic. I settled into a rhythm, mornings sketching in the airy conservatory, afternoons wandering the house's maze of rooms, and evenings lost in novels by the parlor's marble fireplace. The house was a marvel of craftsmanship, intricate woodwork, soaring ceilings, and a grand staircase that curved like a lover's embrace. But as night fell, the house seemed to shift, its warmth giving way to a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed against my skin. I'd find myself pausing mid-sketch, my pencil hovering, certain I'd heard a sound, a rustle, a sigh, just beyond the edge of perception. I dismissed it as the quirks of an old house, but the feeling grew, a quiet dread that followed me like a shadow. It was on the fifth night that the first disturbance emerged. I woke to the faint scent of lavender, delicate but out of place, drifting from the kitchen. Frowning, I padded downstairs, expecting to find a spilled candle or an open window. But the room was pristine, the air still. The teacup I'd left in the sink, rimmed with chamomile residue, now sat on the counter, gleaming as if freshly washed. I stood there, my bare feet chilling against the slate tiles, trying to recall if I'd cleaned it in a late-night haze. I must have, I told myself, but the certainty was fragile, a thread fraying under scrutiny. The anomalies multiplied, each one subtle but unnerving, like notes in a discordant symphony. A sketchbook I'd left open on the dining table would be closed and shelved by morning. A throw blanket would migrate from the sofa to an armchair across the room. One dawn, I found the kitchen chairs pushed against the walls, as if cleared for a dance no one attended. Doubt gnawed at me. Was I sleepwalking, misplacing things in a fog of distraction? To anchor myself, I began photographing the rooms each night, comparing them to the morning's reality. More often than not, discrepancies emerged. A curtain tied back when I'd left it loose. A lamp's shade tilted at an unfamiliar angle. The house was alive, rearranging itself in the dark, and I was no longer certain I was its only tenant. By the third week, I was a nervous wreck, my creativity stifled by paranoia. I slept with the bedroom door locked, a heavy trunk dragged in front of it, my body jolting at every creak of the house settling. I considered calling Elise, but what could I say? That her home was toying with me, shifting like a malevolent puzzle? She'd think I was unhinged. The tension peaked on a moonless Wednesday night, a storm rattling the windows as I lay awake. My nerves strung tight. A sound snapped me to attention, a sharp scratch, deliberate and rhythmic, coming from within the walls. I froze, my heart pounding, straining to hear over the wind's howl. There it was again, a scraping that seemed to climb the wall behind my bed, purposeful and alive. I sat up, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The scratching was too loud, too forceful, to be mice. Whatever moved in the walls was larger, its presence a violation that chilled my blood. I pressed my ear to the plaster, the sound reverberating like a heartbeat, and whispered, "Just the house," though the lie felt hollow. Sleep was impossible, the scratching a relentless assault that continued into the early hours, joined by a low guttural hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. By morning, I was desperate for answers. I called Elise's handyman, a gruff retiree named Walt, who agreed to inspect the house that afternoon. He arrived with a toolbox and a skeptical frown, his weathered face etched with years of practical know-how. I led him through the house, describing the noises, scratching, humming, moving in the walls. He listened, his eyes narrowing, and set to work, tapping walls, checking vents, even prying open a panel in the parlor to peer inside with a flashlight. After an hour, he turned to me, his expression troubled. "No sign of pests," he said, wiping dust from his hands. "No droppings, no chew marks. And these walls..." He trailed off, his frown deepening. "What about them?" I pressed, my voice sharp with urgency. He shook his head, reluctant. "They're solid, no hollow spaces where something could move. Whatever you're hearing, it ain't in the walls." His words were a cold weight, a confirmation that my fears were rooted in something beyond the ordinary. That night, the noises returned with a vengeance, louder, more insistent, as if the house knew I'd sought to uncover its secrets. The scratching was everywhere, a chorus of claws that seemed to surround me, joined by a deep, resonant groan that vibrated through the floor. I ran from room to room, pressing my hands to the walls, desperate to pinpoint the source. But it was futile. The sound shifted, always just out of reach, a taunting dance. In a final act of desperation, I decided to check the basement. The one place I'd avoided, its damp darkness, a realm of last resort. I grabbed my flashlight and descended the creaking wooden stairs, the air growing colder, heavier with each step. The basement was a cavern of shadows, cluttered with old furniture, dusty crates, and the faint smell of mildew. My beam swept the space, casting long, distorted shapes that seemed to writhe in the corners. The scratching was louder here, a frenetic rhythm that echoed off the concrete walls. As I moved deeper, my foot brushed something on the floor and I stumbled, my flashlight clattering to the ground. Bending to retrieve it, my hand grazed a cold metal handle, half hidden beneath a tattered rug. My heart stuttered as I directed the beam downward, revealing a trap door, its heavy wood scarred and weathered, its iron handle rusted but sturdy. The scratching came from beneath, frantic and insistent, and as I watched, the trap door shuddered, as if something below was pushing upward. I scrambled back, a scream caught in my throat, the realization crashing over me. Whatever was making the noise was trapped, and it wanted out. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. But the sounds followed, the scratching now joined by a rhythmic thumping, a force battering at the trapdoor's confines. With shaking hands, I called Elise, no longer caring how I sounded, and poured out the truth. The noises, Walt's visit, the trapdoor. There was a long silence on the line, and when she spoke, her voice was cold, stripped of its usual warmth. "You weren't supposed to find it," she said, her words a blade. "I thought it would stay quiet while I was gone. I'm sorry, Nora." "What?" I gasped, my voice trembling. "Elise, what's down there? What's happening?" Another pause, then a whisper, heavy with resignation. "It's hungry, Nora, always hungry, and now that it knows you're there." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone. The truth a crushing weight. Elise had known, had always known, and she'd sent me here, a sacrifice to whatever lurked beneath her home. A deafening crash from the basement jolted me back to reality. The thumping now a relentless assault, the groans rising to a hungry growl. I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob frozen as if welded shut. The windows were the same, sealed by an unseen force, the glass showing only an endless void beyond. The house was a cage, and I was its prey. The basement door burst open, and in the dim light, I glimpsed something, pale, twisted, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. Its maw opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it lunged, its movements a blur of unnatural speed. I don't know how I survived that night. The next memory is of waking in a hospital bed, my body a map of cuts and bruises, the sterile light a stark contrast to the house's darkness. The police had questions, but I had no answers. No trapdoor, no creature, no evidence of the horror I'd faced. The house, when they searched it, was pristine, its secrets buried deep. Elise, questioned abroad, had an airtight alibi, her voice smooth with practiced innocence. Sometimes I wonder if it was real, if Walt was right and my mind conjured terrors from the shadows. But then I hear it, a faint scratching in the quiet of my apartment, a whisper from the walls, and I know. The house is still out there, its hunger patient, eternal. I've moved, changed my number, but the echoes follow, a reminder that some things, once awakened, never sleep. If you're ever asked to house sit, especially in a grand old home with too much character, listen closely. If you hear scratching, run, and don't look back. Because the whispering walls are always listening, and their appetite is never sated.